Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, my lord?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You fool brave me. Captain Honor, I do not know what strength is in my life. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people fail. Our people.
Our people. I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.
Okay, people, welcome to The Narrative. We are at episode 5, which is a little shocking, but I think this means I have officially figured out how to press buttons just as expertly as any of these other clowns on Badlands that have been acting like running streams is this super complicated process, and you've got to really pay attention and be super qualified to be the prime host of a stream. It is actually a little confusing sometimes. But obviously it just takes a person with a certain will, a certain intellect that maybe not everybody at Badlands has. Before we get into tonight's show, I have a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, thank you guys for joining. I guess thanks to the Eye of the Storm boys for rating the stream, although I try not to associate with them that much. Having one of them help launch the show was purely a coincidence, but I think they're conspiracy theorists. We don't indulge in conspiracy theorizing on this program, and Yeah, we're just the real fake news. That's what you should think of us as. The narrative is the real fake news, and that's the way it is. As always, if you guys want to send anything in during the show, you can do the Rumble rants as usual. You can go to badlandsmedia.tv/boost if you want to select the narrative and send a boost over. As always, anything that comes into the show will be split with between me and my co-host, unless I do a solo stream at some point, which I guess I probably will. This will be the last episode of the narrative for this year. We're not canceled, though. We will be back early next year. Sunday, January 5th is the expected return. But yeah, if you have any last 2024 questions or topics or anything you want to send in tonight, you guys, as always, are the third section of the show, the third topic, rants and boosts. Before that, we're going to do the story right now for the first half. We're going to do theme and thesis for the second half. And tonight's show, we're going to talk about Donald Trump quite a bit, which I know we talk about him on basically every episode of anything Badlands for good reason. Tonight, though, we're really going to indulge ourselves and get into what we mean by Trump as a deal maker, Trump using game theory, the Donald as a character, how many Donald Trumps are there? I'm not even talking about it in a body double sense of the word. So it should be a fun one. Couple other notes. I want to apologize to everybody for something really unprofessional that somebody else at Badlands did tonight. So this guy, I think, like, he had a viral tweet last week, so it kind of went to his head. Look at this. Donald Trump's transition team seeks to pull us out of the WHO on day one. John Harold, Patel Patriot, Trump pullout game strong. You're not going to see that kind of hogwash and joking around on this program tonight. We're going to take everything very seriously. There's going to be no joking around. The InfoWars isn't something to joke around about. So you're not going to see that at Brightlands. That's something that John does on Badlands. And, you know, I'm trying to just carve out a bit of a more professional path than that stuff. And before I bring my guest on, tonight's show is brought to you by two sponsors that you can see in the image right below me. I did upload the correct one. We've corrected the color blindness issues with the run sheets. And the first sponsor tonight are our friends at EasyRx. Today's show is brought to you by our partners at EasyRx. With government failures and devastation running rampant, it's never been a better time to stockpile popular medications like amoxicillin, azithromycin, ivermectin, fenbendazole, hydroxychloroquine, and other viral care medications, and so much more. Right now, EasyRx is having the best sale of the year. For a limited time, Badlanders will receive 25% off purchases over $100 using the promo code CHRISTMAS. Rest assured, you and your loved ones are ready for anything with EasyRx. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/EasyRx and use the promo code CHRISTMAS for 25% off purchases over $100. Stock up on antibiotics and other necessary medications to keep you and your family healthy. badlandsmedia.tv, EasyRx, promo code CHRISTMAS for great savings. 2 notes on that. Shout out to EasyRx for using the promo code CHRISTMAS instead of like holiday and stuff like that, because Lord knows we need to bring the word Christmas back into the American vernacular. And I think that is the best deal they've run in quite a while. So shout out to them. I'm getting over my own sickness very recently, so should be good to go tonight and make my guest stay up way too late. That is the plan. I'm usually successful. Second sponsor of tonight's show is a brand new one that we are excited about, and that is our friends at Right Wing Naturals. We have a brand new sponsor. Right Wing Naturals is the all-American soap brand you can trust for handcrafted, cold-pressed soap made the old-fashioned way. We stand for God, family, and country, just like you do. Every bar supports American jobs and conservative causes, like the Fallen Outdoors and Boulder Crest Foundation. Forget about big companies that hate what you stand for. Support us. We share your values and employ everyday Americans making everyday products. We make soap like George Washington would, with our hands, timeless, effective, and as real as America itself. The left hates us? Good. It's time to vote with your wallet for what's right. Our soaps are not just effective, they're edgy and unapologetically hilarious. From Dark Horse to Pine and Pilsner to Franken-Sexy, bring the scent of freedom to your shower. Crafted from natural, responsibly sourced ingredients. No unpronounceable chemicals here, just pure like the American dream. Built for real men, rugged, masculine, and straight to the point. Perfect for every patriot from the outdoorsman to the office warrior. Free of woke nonsense. Give the gift of freedom today. Right Wing Naturals, because smelling great is just common sense. For real soap, for real men, go to rightwingnaturals.com today and get 15% off your first order with promo code Badlands. That's rightwingnaturals.com, 15% off your first order. That's good stuff. I used to have a company, Sasquatch or something. Squatch. Dr. Squatch, I think that was it. Kind of similar to that, so glad to see MAGA getting in the game. And I can say from secondhand experience, Real Mrs. Bright is, of course, she doesn't come in to watch the show. She comes in when you talk about soap. Last year, she became an extremist about finding stuff in the house that had unpronounceable chemical names in it and replacing it with stuff that we could pronounce. So, anyway, shout out to tonight's sponsors. Thank you very much. Without further ado, my co-host tonight is the coiner of the TrumpaMania term and fellow Infowar savage, I believe hopelessly Irish, like myself. And that would be my friend Ghost. Welcome to the show, Ghost.
What's up, everybody? So happy to be here.
Yeah, man. I see that you're not in the den, the Christmas den. You've been sequestered.
Yes, I have been sequestered. My wife is Mrs. Ghost is using the kitchen tonight. Normally, like in that setup, that's my kitchen. I'm sitting at my kitchen like island. Yeah, and she's in there.
Not the great place for a studio.
Yeah, she's cooking up a storm tonight. The past few days, man, have just been like my son turned 2 on Thursday. I see people in the chat saying that it's their birthday. So happy birthday all around all the Badlanders. But my son turned 2 on Thursday. I have a 5-year-old daughter, a 3-year-old daughter, and then my son.
So it's a very calm household, is what you're saying.
Very calm. I was telling you earlier how he has just turned into a total like chest beating savage, and my little girls were like, I mean, you know, they were tough. Toddlers are always tough, but they were angels compared to what he has become. He has become just the terrible twos defined, like personified. Like I was typing up my brief takes earlier, and he was climbing up my leg and hitting me in the head with a toy. And like one of the situations where he's hitting my daughter with a toy in the head, and I pick him up to move him away, and I'm like, "Oh, baby, are you okay?" And as I'm holding him over here, he grabs a cup full of water off the counter and throws it across the room. It's just like,
oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, so gear up for that, bro.
So you've got 3, and where do you fall? I mean, I've already made up my mind before I've even got my kid here. Where do you fall in the nurture-nature debate now with 3 of them? If you have to assign poly-market odds or weighting to either one.
Well, you'll learn that kids are born with a personality. You will absolutely see that, like from the moment they're born, you'll see their personality, and it'll come out. And I'm sure that nurture plays into it to a certain extent. But like my firstborn is a carbon copy of my wife, in like every sense of the word. She even like says stuff to me, talks down to me in the way my wife talks down to me.
You have brought that anecdote up so many times, even in private, that I get the feeling that you're in trouble quite a bit. But
Yeah, but I mean, this is definitely karma because I was the second. I was one of 4, 3 brothers. I was the second, and I was the wild one. So this is definitely karma, nature coming back just to let me know. And I understand now, and I apologize to my parents. I understand how much of a pain in the ass I was.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be, there's, of course, nurture has something to do with it. Environment has something to do with it, but it's funny with my, especially recently with my wife being around. A lot of my cousins come back into town these days. A lot of my cousins are having kids. I was one of 12 cousins. I have brothers and sisters, but 12 first cousins, actually 14. I always get it wrong. I think there's 14 of us, but we all grew up within 20 minutes of each other. It's like 14 of us within a span of 8 years or so. And man, they all, like at 5 years old, they are the same personalities as they are at 35 years old, etc. So I am much more heavily weighted toward the nature side of things these days. But the reason I have Ghost on the show tonight, I think it just came up organically like a week and a half ago. You and I were going back and forth in DMs, probably, I forget what he was even about, brief takes and stuff like that. But of course, as usual, we're talking about Donald Trump a lot, and I know we bring this up a lot. I mean, we talk about it on the Power Hour. We've talked about it on this show. We've talked about you talk about it on Daily, etc. We talk about the fact that Donald Trump is more than a politician. He's something between a politician, a businessman, a character, a real guy and a character. That's what the second half of the show is going to really focus on, is the Donald character, just sort of really deep diving on where do we think that kind of character came from? Did he learn from certain things? Are there any hints we have? I know Ghost has a lot of ideas about maybe even timelines around when this character started being either crafted or debuted, like introduced into the public. And, just as a tease of that, we've all seen the interviews of him in the 80s and his demeanor. There's little hints that's the same. You can see it's the same guy under there, the same ideals, but the behavior that's not the same guy. That seems like that was a sort of Donald Trump acting pretty natural. And these days we've got a whole different version of him. So we're going to kind of explore where that comes from. But the first half of the show is going to be similar, but I just want to talk about how that character and real person, how Donald Trump is kind of navigating the current battle space, the current narrative battle space on a few different levels. And I guess to start with, just on a super macro take, we're in this transition phase right now between, a very real election in November and supposedly a real inauguration in January 2025. And there's so many spinning plates in the air, from like continuing resolutions to international deal making, and there's wars popping off, there's scandals popping off constantly, Trump's doing the rounds. What do you see right now as kind of his demeanor, or how he's just handling the chaos right now? Just in general, your macro take on what's Trump focused on right now in this transition window. How's he doing? What stuff are you really noticing out of his deployments lately?
I mean, I feel like he is so in control of himself, and he's so in control. Like, he just seems so calm and so it feels like he is in total control. Like the way that and I know that's a little bit of a cop out, because that's what people have been saying about him for years, but none of this stuff seems to faze him. I mean, if you were to take just the list of things that have happened to him just in the past 8 months, 6 months, being like the assassination attempt, right? The prosecutions. I mean, you put any other politician ever in that situation, and that is a terrifying thing for someone to be put through on the receiving end of that from the deep state. And yet he is sitting there laughing about it openly, joking about it, having fun with it. I mean, being whimsical about the whole thing. I mean, that's the word that we used the other night.
Right.
And I think it puts everyone at ease. I think it puts a lot of people at ease to see him having fun, when this is, for a lot of people who aren't really read in on like Q or devolution or any of these other theories, are kind of scared. I think people are a little afraid of like what is happening, because people honestly believe that he's going to be assassinated or something. But he doesn't seem to be worried at all. Like, he's laughing about it, and he's like, this is actually, I'm not like here's the take. He's the only one who wants to be here. Like, nobody else wants to be here, but he's having the most fun.
That's a good way to put it. It reminds me of, you know what? Fuck it. This is the narrative. We talk about story structure quite a bit. Obviously, we talk about that on Story Hour, but on the narrative, we don't have to focus on one. I'm just going to find... This is dead air, which is anathema to professional podcasting, but that's okay, because we're not professionals here. I have mentioned this scene so many times, and I don't know if we've ever played it on any of the shows. So what you just described, Trump's demeanor, is the Rorschach Watchmen scene, which it's straight out of the graphic novel. I'm just going to let the scene do the talking. This is exactly how I imagine Donald Trump is coming off to both Con Inc., to everybody. like you said, I mean, we've got so many factions in the info war on the game board, and I think that Trump probably comes off this way to most of them.
That doesn't make the world this way. We do.
Hey, Rorschach. Hey, you're pretty famous, right? Hey, you know what? I'm pretty famous, too. Ain't that right? That's right. You know, maybe I can give you an autograph, huh? What you say, big boy?
None of you seem to understand. I'm not locked in here with you. That's it! You're locked in here with me!
So, apologies to anybody who doesn't enjoy on this Christmas week watching a man be doused in boiling oil. But the point had to be made. Rorschach has that first principles forward mindset, but that's one of the most famous, scenes in comic books for a reason. It's that mindset. I'm not trapped in here with you. You're trapped in here with me. And that is what it feels like right now. I mean, if we, I want your take on it in terms of, I mean, we could pick a faction, pick a battlefield. We've got Trump. I mean, a recent one from a few days ago is just how he dealt with the whole continuing resolution Congress type of thing. That was even, to me, a pretty good example of them being trapped with him, although the media is trying to spin it that Trump dealt with some sort of mutiny as if it's a bad thing that people find out who the rhinos are and who fake MAGA is more and more every time. But how did you see the way he navigated that in particular with Congress?
It's a good question. I mean, sorry, door just opened and caught me off guard. Repeat the first part of the question.
The continuing resolution in Congress and everything. I mean, obviously Trump's on the sidelines, but in terms of the public narrative, he was kind of quarterbacking it to the point where even the media was admitting he was quarterbacking it. But then they're seeming to kind of also say that he lost control because he didn't really get what he wanted at first. So I'm just curious how you think he navigated the continuing resolution in Congress and the narratives there, him and Elon Musk and all that.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, this is where, when I look at the war of stories, as you call it, and I think that's a great framing for everything. I mean, I look at the storytelling as a very literal war of stories, where I think that there's still an enemy out there that is severely wounded. There's a scene that I want to play here in a minute from Game of Thrones that I think kind of encapsulates how I view the current situation. I think when Trump speaks and he puts out deployments, he's not just speaking to his base. I think a lot of people assume he's just talking to us. I think he's speaking to many audiences, but most importantly, he's speaking to his enemy. And he's basically trying to lead his enemy into positions that are compromised in order to ambush them, but also to expose them. Because ultimately, this isn't just about saving America in this moment. This isn't just about rounding up the bad guys and putting them in jail. If it were, he would have done that in March of 2017, and this would have all been a wrap, and we would have gotten a lot more accomplished between then and now. What this really is about is pulling all of us out of our domesticated posture, where we are all so servile and subservient to these oligarchs, and we ask these authorities for permission to do things and permission to think things. He wants us to be more assertive and take control of our government and take control of our society. And that's how this lives on past him when he's gone. And that will be his legacy. If he succeeds in doing that, that'll ultimately be his legacy and what this whole Great Awakening is about. But when it comes to that specific thing, the continuing resolution, it's about exposing the fact that the Republican Party is just as compromised as the Democrat Party. And I mean, you're looking at the modern Republican Party was founded by the disciples of Leon Trotsky. Leon Trotsky, along with Vladimir Lenin, were the two guys who were the Bolshevik leaders of the Russian Revolution of 1917. And basically, Lenin and Stalin booted Trotsky out of Russia. He goes to Mexico, starts a new kind of political movement. And then his disciples in the 1970s create a thing called neoconservatism. And then that becomes the Republican Party. And so people talk about the switch happening with the Republicans and the Democrats. The modern Republican Party was literally founded by leftists. I went and asked Perplexity about that, and Perplexity said that. The AI said, the Republican Party, like the modern Republican Party, neoconservatism, was founded by leftists. So exposing that and exposing the fact that the Uniparty is there's leftists on both sides, and the left-right thing is a false paradigm. You and I agree on that. So when I say leftist, I'm not really referring necessarily just to the idea of like a left versus right.
Right.
It's really just more of a collectivism, like Marxism, centralized government versus sovereignty, individuality, rugged individualism, which is what really the American spirit is, decentralized control.
Yeah, absolutely. I was literally going to use the word collectivism to describe that before you did. And the switch theory, not the one we talk about on Badlands, as a former Democrat, as a former leftist who voted for Obama, I remember people talking about that. That was a popular talking point during the Obama years in particular, like this idea that whenever you would be confronted by a Republican who at least knew some semblance of history, they'd hit you with all of those factoids about Democrats being the party of slavery and blah, blah, blah. And the only way out of it, you were taught as a Marxist that didn't know you were a Marxist, is, well, the party's switched. And then it's interesting when you talk about Trotsky and neoconservatism, because it's true on one layer. It's true that modern conservatives are just Democrats. But it is not true that modern Democrats are conservatives. So that's what it's like. Democrats were half right and half completely wrong. Chris Paul talks about this quite a bit. I mean, this is a reason that I think on so many of the Badlands shows, purposely or a lot of us kind of accidentally have just found ourselves gravitating toward just constant distillation process of first principles ideas. It's one of the reasons that it's not to talk down to the audience or anything, but obviously most of our audience was conservatives. Some were liberals, some were independents, but most have been lifelong conservatives that have woken up to the fact that they were lied to as well throughout most of their socio-political lives. I often say that I think a lot of people voted for Donald Trump by accident because they were on the right team. Now, that's not to throw stones or cast aspersions. I think that was a feature of the Patriot Plan. I think that they knew that the Republican Party was more vulnerable to friendly takeover. I also think that they knew, in the credit that I'll give to conservative Americans is that they were closer. They were less subverted in terms of their core ideals and fundamental beliefs than modern leftists. Even 15 years ago when I identified as a leftist, we didn't consider ourselves radicals, but there certainly is a lot of radical bullshit in leftism that isn't really the same thing in conservatism. But I think it's important, and I'm glad, every time, like you said with the continuing resolution, people can think whatever they want about Trump going to Turning Point USA, etc. My personal view, Chris Paul a couple weeks ago used the term drafting, like from NASCAR. In terms of, I'm sure people who are familiar with racing understand the term. We did Days of Thunder. But man, ever since he pointed that out, that's really how I look at what Trump does, where it's like, yeah, he'll go on Tucker Carlson. Yeah, he'll go to Turning Point USA. They've got a captured audience of millions of young, impressionable Americans. We often point out that at guard events for Badlands, we want to start seeing more young conservatives or young America First patriots coming to those things. They're all kind of being siphoned into this Charlie Kirk like clown world where you're supposed to bow down to him. And now we've got this whole fucking movement that's built around talking about how this guy saved Donald Trump and saved the Republican Party. And then if you think Trump is co-signing that when he goes to these events, I just don't think you've learned what Trump does, which is he goes wherever the people are and he'll use whatever that platform is. So I totally agree that especially Congress and the continuing resolution, he got to play it both ways. He's like, no deal, we're not going to do this. Then he says, yep, we'll do a deal under these circumstances. And he kind of gets to play winner either way. And either way, he's at the center of the story. Every single headline about the continuing resolution was talking about Donald Trump. So it's like, that's clearly part of what he does, even when he's not in quote unquote direct control of a narrative. He inserts himself right into the middle of it either way.
Yeah, no, that's very, very well said. I do personally believe that, one thing that your writing really did, it helped me understand that I've kind of always been this way with history. History is basically just storytelling. It's all it is. And one thing that one of my professors taught me, actually my Russian history professor, who was very based, said all history is interpretation. In this classroom, my interpretation is the correct interpretation. He kind of give you a wink. And that was his way of being like, every version of history you hear is just one person's interpretation, even the one that's written in your textbook. It's up to you to decide whether or not that interpretation maps onto reality. And that's Absolutely. Really that's what the study of history really is. And so what that ultimately means, and I've come to appreciate this, like from reading your writing, is that's the power of storytelling. And when you look at the power of storytelling and what stories can do, stories literally can turn entire civilizations against one another. It can make people become completely satiated in bloodlust and want to kill entire societies of people they've never met before on the other side of the world because they've been told stories about those people that they themselves have not bothered to try to verify. They've never been to these places in many cases. And it's amazing how powerful that is to see that forced upon a population and for that to happen. And so to get back to the drafting thing and like being a former leftist, one thing that I've really come to appreciate about you and Chris is that being former left, like being from the left formally, y'all have obviously had to reconcile a lot of things and do like this introspection and look at these ideas that you once believed in and have to evaluate things, and that's probably caused, I would imagine, a lot of personal growth, and you've had to come a long way from where you were, whereas when you say people accidentally voted for Donald Trump, I know exactly what you mean. You mean that people who already had certain policy positions on certain issues felt like they were already on the right side. They're like, well, I'm already of the right mindset, so the Great Awakening is happening, absolutely, but it's not happening to me. It's happening to everyone else, and these people are going to figure it out, and they're going to come to my side, and I don't really have to do anything other than just sit back, continue voting for Republican, eat popcorn, and enjoy the situation. That's not really what the Great Awakening is. The Great Awakening is everyone having that transformation, including people on the quote-unquote right, the people who already were anti-abortion, who already were Christian, who already were, had these values that align with where we are now with first principles and America first. That doesn't mean though that you get off the hook with having to have an internal awakening, a dark night of the soul, as Joseph Campbell would call it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not even to say, okay, these are just people who are watching these kinds of shows are not normies. They're not normie Republicans. I think that's more the people that I'm thinking about is normie layer Republicans who voted for Donald Trump. Now, are they further along on an awakening than they were circa 2016? I would say yes, but largely because of the theme of tonight's episode, Trump and a lot of his public deployments, which, we'll get into the history of that. But just in terms of the current situation, I think Trump has been really influential in galvanizing all those people. And some of the best long-term things that I think he's done for the conservative base of the U.S. is in going to war with the Republican Party. One of the sort of observations that I've made for quite a while is that during his first term, it was largely a war declaration in terms of the public narrative. We all know that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. We believe there's devolution operations. We believe there's a Patriot plan, right? There's a lot of real kinetic, socio-political, military maneuvering going on in game theory. But in terms of the public war of stories, Trump declared war on the media as public enemy number one. When he came down the escalator, the war declaration to the American people was the media. These are the fucks that you all need to pay attention to. And I know it sounds so simple, but when you really think about and understand the power of storytelling, if you simply just make a Freudian switch in your head and you stop using the word media and you stop using the word journalist and you think story and storyteller, then the effect of the stories on your mind are immediately halved or more. If you just think about, before the awakening or whatever, if somebody told you, hey, there's a news article that says X, then you're going to, even now, you would probably just have a certain impression that you either think that this represents reality, like objective reality, if you're a total normie, or if you're a little bit more awakened, you think news article means claim. A claim is being made about reality. So maybe you're a little bit closer if you're there. But if you used the word, imagine if I came up to you and said, hey, there's a story today about X. And that's why a lot of our language, I think, healthily as a movement, has started to graduate from using news to using story. Oh, did you see the story about the friendly fire incident? Did you see the story about, the North Korea, the South Korean, coup that happened recently? But whatever, pick your poison. It doesn't mean that the story is false, but I think that when you reprogram yourself and use the word story and use the word storyteller instead of journalist and media and news, then you're already halfway there, because you already understand that what you're being told, as you said about history, is a story that may or may not be true, and that the writer may or may not believe is true. And I think, again, coming back to Trump, it was his first war declaration in the War of Stories for a reason. He went to war with the storytellers. And again, I don't think that was him saying all of these people are lying all the time. It was him telling the American people, you have to think about who is telling you things and why they are telling you those things. And, that's the good thing, where even though I do think a lot of people voted for him by accident, I think he then started educating them over his first two terms, including the Biden term, to really start thinking for themselves a lot more, which is how they end up down rabbit holes that bring them into the info war in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Because there's just a lot. There's a lot of nuance to this stuff, and you appreciate that. People probably like to think that I have a reductive view of some of the things that I talk about, given the subject matter that I get into with the Middle East. But there's a lot of nuance to it, and then when you look at certain figures like Nick Fuentes, like they create a side of it where anyone who criticizes certain things is going to be pushed into like that camp. And, there's so much nuance to it. And being the editor of the Substack, that I've dedicated so much copy to trying to flush out that nuance and trying to understand things where it's like things are not so black and white. There's infinite shades of gray when it comes to the real world, because this is a very complex world that we live in. And the stories, storytelling, the crux of storytelling is you have a protagonist, you have an antagonist. And the idea is when you're telling your story, you want the audience to get behind your protagonist, and you want the audience to view the antagonist as something that needs to be defeated by the protagonist. So you're going to, when you're looking at like the real world, you're going to ignore things that make your antagonist look good, and you're going to ignore things that make your protagonist look bad. And that's what I think people who lack nuance do when they're trying to do this stuff in earnest. And then obviously like the news media, the mainstream, intentionally do that. And they actually just make things up, and they'll just invert it. They'll present the bad guys, the good guy, the good guy's the bad guy. But a lot of times it's not even that simple. There's a lot of gray in there, and it's not as simple as there being a good guy or a bad guy. Sometimes it's just all bad guys.
And that last point, I think that's one of the nuances that I think Trump had the biggest positive effect on people with. One of the things that I've noticed, a few years ago, I'm sure we all have had very similar experiences when you experience what you said, like the dark night of the soul. You end up going down these rabbit holes yourself. You end up then trying to forcibly red pill people. Most of us have probably tried to do that with people that we know, people that we think are going to listen to us. I've certainly had those experiences, especially coming from a leftist family. I'll say that mine aren't ideologues, which makes it so that we can communicate. I always call them JFK Democrats. Like they were right about JFK by accident. It's just like, this is who you vote for in this area. But one thing, like, as I've calmed down over the years a little bit, contrary to what people might think, I do try to look for, now when I'm, even my wife forgives me more about starting or at least engaging in disagreements with her family and my family. She understands more these days what I'm doing, which is I'm not really trying to win an argument anymore. I'm actually trying to understand why this person is saying the things they do. Because if I understand that, it's not this kumbaya thing of like, once you understand this person, then you can, it's not even that. I more want to know what piece of programming, what enemy deployments, what enemy stories have been the most effective. It's like disarming, it's like diagnosing the inner workings of a bomb, like a psychological bomb. You think about real or movie scenarios where somebody's got a bomb strapped to them and you've got to figure out which wire do you cut and how do you engineer it so that you don't blow them up. You can think of that through the lens of narrative warfare and psychological warfare. That what a lot of us were trying to do early in the info war is like hold our family down, and they've got this psychological bomb like wired to their head, and we're just like hitting it with a rock, right? And being like, you got this bomb on your head. You can't see it. None of you can see it. Only I can see it. Trump told me about the bomb that's in your head, and I just hold still, Mom. Like, I need to get it out. So you can understand maybe through that framing why they're like, you're all crazy. I'm keeping it here. It's protecting me. But if you understand how it works, then I think even if you can't cut the wire, you can sort of see it. You can see new bombs being wired in real time and subvert them. And the way I think about it is, one of the sort of traps or bombs that I think has been most effective is, it was astounding to me to really understand that whether it's my in-laws or my parents, a lot of people find it very difficult to believe what you just said, which is that many in the media are not accidentally wrong, like, oh, they got it wrong, right? They can accept that. It's these people are lying to you and have a vested interest in lying to you virtually every time they are telling you something. And it sounds so obvious to everybody watching this show. Like, you're not watching Badlands Media if you trust the mainstream media, right? But so many people just didn't understand, like, no, the people on CNN and Fox are lying to you because their job is to knowingly present false stories to you for desired end goals. And again, to bring it to Trump, I think that that's the genius of, like, he starts out with this crazy seeming rhetoric, but then in hindsight, for a lot of even normies, they're seeing, like, man, well, they did lie about this and they did lie about that. And you get to a certain point where I think even normies go, you guys can't keep accidentally being wrong about literally everything. Like, at a certain point, you're being wrong on purpose, right?
Yeah. Well, and, the other thing that I think people say is that, because I've heard it all the time, is, well, it wasn't always this bad. Like, it wasn't always like this. The MSN used to tell the truth and they actually used to do the news. But, at a certain point, they stopped. And then, 2012, the Smith-Mundt Act gets revoked or gets repealed. And now they're lying to us. Before they weren't. Now you need to understand something. Television came around in 1951. I think that was when the first broadcast was 1951. That's when all the networks got their licenses from the government. And the guys who were put in charge.
What year did you say?
I think it was 1951 was the first broadcast, I want to say. And then, like, by 1953, it was like television kind of was rolled out and became very, very
everybody's living rooms.
Yeah. But by the mid 50s, it was everywhere.
Right.
And the guys who were put in charge of those networks were psychological warfare officers from World War II. Literally, they were like intelligence officers who ran psychological warfare campaigns in World War II. And then they were put in charge of the network. So no. The MSM has always been lying to you.
Yeah.
It's just to what degree are they lying to you, and what is it they're trying to convince you of? Like what are the things they're trying to make you do? Right now, it's like they've gone full throated. Like, we are trying to pin you down and hurt you in a way that they weren't maybe trying to do decades ago, because they had a vested interest in the proliferating success of America, because that's how they expanded their hegemony around the world. Was the American, the U.S. dollar expanding, the U.S. economy expanding, their tax base expanding. Like, there's a vested interest in that, and that interest is now gone, and their interests have shifted. So now they've shifted tactics. But the idea that they were telling the truth 50 years ago is just incorrect. It's not true.
I'm glad you bring that up. And that reminds me, actually, Chris and I, like 2 weeks ago, had done a movie I had never seen. I think it was 1979, called Network. And if you have not seen that movie, it's bang on what Ghost is saying, or it makes it very apparent. That is, I think it's a minority of especially our audience, but that is a very worrying trend I see among sort of the normie MAGA layers of the info war, is that they do say things like, when I was 20, like we had Walter Cronkite, and we could trust what the news was saying. Not only, to your point, was their news fake as well, it was orders of magnitude more fake than 2020 news. And I know that sounds crazy. I know that's a big claim. There's going to be people like typing right now, no, things got way faker. Not at all. And I'll tell you exactly why. It doesn't mean that we had, let's go before the info war. Let's say 2016. Of course, the news was fake, right? And of course, tons of the internet was fake. Facebook was censored, Twitter was censored, YouTube was centralized. All these things were censored. But the sheer number of cable channels, of websites, of YouTube channels, of Twitter accounts, the sheer just amount of information out there in 2010 and beyond was almost infinitely more than in 1955, 1960. So even though the central narrative still exists, crafting it became much more difficult. Even before Trump and Q and all these decentralized operations that we think have been going on, they were starting to lose control of a unified story to feed the American people. It doesn't mean that this is where I think the internet prompted them to lean more heavily into the controlled opposition dynamic, because they're like, man, we're not able to tell a unified story enough, so we're going to have to do like red team versus blue team a lot stronger. That, I know that existed in the 90s and 80s, but man, it accelerated in our lifetimes, in our generation. It was like you were taught that Republicans were bad people if you were a young Democrat, millennial, or Gen Z. And if you're a millennial or Gen Z Republican, you were taught that liberals were idiots and they were communists and whatever. And that may be true, but you were also voting for Bushes to go bomb kids in the Middle East, right? So you're literally aiding and abetting war crimes, while the other side is trying to vote for infant murder. So in the 50s and 60s, I think it was 3 networks at the time, after 1951, like you mentioned. Then it expanded into 4 networks. So think about just the sheer logistics of controlling a central narrative where you only have 3 to 4 pipelines of storytelling going into the American people, besides the people who are still reading newspapers, where there was about 5 or 6 papers of record. I was taught in journalism school. The New York Times, you had the Boston Globe, you had the LA Times, you had the Chicago Tribune. These were the news. And they would have little micro disagreements in areas of expertise. But there's like 30 sources of information that the American people are getting their story out of circa 1955. And they thought that their news was being more honest. But I would say it's more what you're saying. the media really just wasn't desperate to control them, so they weren't being as obvious about it because people were a lot more controlled in the 50s and 60s than they are in the modern age, even though I would say most people in our community think the opposite. They think people were more free, as you said, in the 50s and 60s, and that is not the case. They just had less information available, so the controllers were kinder to them. Maybe we'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like I said, there was also, the incentive was there to grow the tax base in America. So the idea of allowing the country to proliferate prosperity, because the income tax was only imposed temporarily as a temporary measure after World War I, and only really, I think the elite were like the highest tax bracket were really paying it. And it was only to pay off the debt from World War I, and then they suspended it. They repealed it. And then after World War II, the debt racked up again. And they're like, we need to do this again. But unfortunately, I think everyone needs to pay income tax now to get this thing paid off. And then they just never repealed it. And then they expanded it. And then they just conditioned us to get used to paying taxes and got us into this tax farm that they have us in now. And so when you look at it from that lens, and then, the petrodollar, of course, of 1973, there was a huge incentive to expand the tax base and to allow prosperity to grow. And I think Patrick Gunwell says it best, where he says they were cutting us in on the deal before, and now they've cut us out.
That's a great way to put it.
It's a great way to put it. Yeah. And look, I mean, the American Revolution, one of the things that Benjamin Franklin, that really his major contribution was, he established a network of newspapers throughout the colonies that worked together to disseminate alternative stories to what the British-based newspapers were disseminating out of New York City. And that was a major instrument that the colonists and patriots used in the war, because all the newspapers that were funded out of London were calling George Washington a traitor, and had 35% of the country pro-British, anti-George Washington. So it's like, this is not a new phenomenon. This is not something that just happened even in the 20th century. This is something that has been going on for a very long time. And I can even show a more recent example if you want to. Let me share my screen. And this is something that I wrote about the other day. You have kind of getting back to the modern story of what's happening. Here's from RT talking about Anthony Blinken admitting that there's regime change and that they've been trying to do regime change in Iran. This is a limited hangout. It's talking about him speaking at the Council of Foreign Relations, which is one of the worst and most nefarious groups in the world. And then he talks about, in the past 20 years, we've been trying to do regime change in Iran. And then I wrote about how actually regime change in Iran started in the 1890s. And that there was a war, like a Cold War of sorts, between Britain and Russia. They both had a vested interest in taking over. It was called Persia then.
And how many times have those two been at odds when you go down those rabbit holes?
Yeah. Well, you hear about France supporting, and for good reason, supporting the colonists in the American Revolution. But one thing that Matt Aird has really taught me for breaking history is that it was actually Russia who was backing us, and Russia's the only country who has been an ally of America in every single war we've ever fought. And that is a fact. That's amazing. But look here, I mean, the first place that oil was discovered was in 1908. It was discovered right here in Iran, not in Iraq, but in Iran. This is the oil belt that runs underneath the Persian Gulf. Most of it's in Iran. And so 1890, like, Britain and Russia are fighting each other, or like they have this Cold War going. There's speculation that this oil belt exists. They finally discover it. This guy named Darcy, Knox Darcy, from Britain. He negotiates this deal where he is going to get the exclusive rights to this entire region right here in Iran for prospecting. He discovers oil in 1908. He then negotiates in 1914 to sell the majority shares of his company, which was called the oil. It was like the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. He sells it to the British government, so it basically becomes nationalized by the British government. They now own the oil in Iran. And then in 1950, this guy Mogaddesh runs for president of Iran on the premise that he's going to nationalize the oil industry and basically take back the oil from the British He wins the presidency. And then so Eisenhower in 1953 approves a plan for the CIA to overthrow Mogadishu and install the Shah. And so that happens. Like, we overthrow Mogadishu. We install the Shah. The Shah is very pro-West. He allows, women to go to college and like all this great stuff. I'm sure people have seen the memes of, Iran, like Tehran was like New York City in the 1960s.
Right.
And then, but that was all based on this deal in 1954 called the Consortium Agreement. And the Consortium Agreement basically said, okay, Britain, you now get these rights back. We're going to make sure you have the rights because Mogadishu nationalized it, took it away from you. They changed the name of the company to British Petroleum, better known today as BP. So BP Oil is an Iranian oil company controlled by the British government. And that consortium agreement expired in 1979. And the Shah, after everything that happened in the 70s with the Yom Kippur War with Israel and the Kissinger going to Saudi Arabia and negotiating the petrodollar deal, and then basically allowing Saudi Arabia to have a nationalized oil industry, Aramco, but not allowing Iran to do it. The Shah says, you know what? I'm not going to renew this consortium agreement in 1979. So what happens? In 1978, the CIA decides we're going to declassify all of our documents about this overthrow in 1953, and we're going to release it to the public in Iran. And then we're going to go send our guys in there to dress up like the Shah's personal secret police. They went to this famous movie theater with 500 people inside, chained the doors shut, poured jet fuel on the building, and lit the building on fire, burned everyone inside alive. That gets all the people in Iran out on the streets protesting, and that brings on the Iranian Revolution of 1979, and then starts this like ideological arms race between Iran and Saudi Arabia of who can be the most orthodox, who can be the most extreme Islamic country. And all of a sudden, Saudi Arabia is like, oh, yeah, we're going to shut down all of our movie theaters. Oh, yeah, we're going to shut down all of our cafes. Oh, yeah, men can't speak to women in public. And it just gets progressively more extreme until you get, Al-Qaeda and Hamas and all these groups forming in the late 1980s. And there's a whole story there. The whole thing is a story that unfolds that Mohammed bin Salman talks about that, how 1979 was a fulcrum in the Middle East. And that's really what started the proliferation of this Orthodox Islam that he's been trying to shut down.
And I think it's, even it's actually funny. There's a million stories that lead up to that and that thread out from it. But even the point you make about BP, those are, I don't necessarily call that a story, but sometimes I use the term, or even in my own head, I think of it as language coding. I think on a recent show, I was talking about etymology and, the origins of words, and I'm really fascinated by that stuff. But even on a very basic level, phonetics and words and language coding matters. So even if you're not telling somebody a fully formed story, humans are impressionistic. All animals are impressionistic. It's sort of a fight or flight response. Even when you're being presented with information, there are even miniature little fight or flight responses going on in your head because it behooves you to know whether or not what you're being told is true or false. So for example, you need to know if some new person is coming up to you and presenting information to you, it's a survival instinct where you need to have a kind of good judge of, is this person likely to be lying to me? What are my surroundings like right now? How does this person look to me? And that's how you're going to then judge whatever story, whatever information that they're telling you. So when you mention BP, that's a funny little micro story. That's a language code in and of itself. I know you mentioned, you just took us through the actual pathway, the progression of how an Iranian oil company became literally codified as British Petroleum, right? Mm-hmm. But why did they name it British Petroleum? Because it's a language coding effort. It's obfuscation right there. When Westerners hear BP or British Petroleum, they think Western. They immediately think non-threatening. Where when you hear, even as a normie American, when you hear Aramco, you think Arabians, you think other, you think Middle Eastern. It's something different. It's the other. It's the great other. One of the refrains that you'll find throughout Western literature, if you study that, like do deep dives on that, is the concept of the other. Especially a lot of American writing, in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, revisionist history, a lot of it is talking about the other, whether it's Native Americans or Middle Easterners, all these epics, even going back to Greek and Roman writing, a lot of it is talking about the others when it comes to Persians. So when you just code a company like that in British Petroleum, BP, it's kind of hiding, it's subconsciously hiding all this history. It's like a capper on all the stories that you just mentioned that you go through, that they don't really want you to don't look at what's behind the British Petroleum door. The Russia stuff is absolutely fascinating. The Iranian Revolution, not only, like you said, it's storytelling, but when you say the effects of it, you end up with Hamas, you end up with ISIS, you end up with Al Qaeda and all that. I know not all from Iran. I just mean these sorts of deployments, right? But I know you know this, but it goes further than most people think. Most people think people can get themselves, I think, to the point of there's regime change. The CIA has admitted that there's regime change. And often when enough decades pass, they'll do what you're saying, which is limited hangouts, disclosure efforts, where they're retroactively saying like, hey, yeah, we were responsible for this regime change. And then we lost control of the effects of it somewhere along the way, right? So they go, well, we were lying to you about A, but then B, we had no control over. But the truth is they're lying to you about B as well. And most of the time, when it comes to these extremist organizations that you talk about a lot, they were funded by the same people who destabilized the region in the first place. So when we talk about the Hegelian dialectic, in order to have a controlled Hegelian dialectic, you can't just have control over the problem. You also have to have control over the reaction, or else you can't guide people to the solution. You can't just hope for the reaction. The reaction has to be, hey, look, all of a sudden, people are locked up here in Iran. We burn them alive with jet fuel. We blame it on a certain party. That's bad enough. That's going to get a certain organic reaction. But then if you've got these revolutionaries who appear on the scene and they're gonna fight for the rights of the Iranians that have been attacked by this subversive element, that's the next leg of the false narrative that then they go behind, right? Again, I know you know that, but a lot of people, they stop at A, right? They stop at problem. They don't think about reaction. The reaction is the more dangerous thing. Like 9/11, the problem was 9/11 and blaming it on the terrorists, right? But the reaction was a media blitz for 10 years about the war on terror. And that part of it was what people thought was honest. So it's been the same playbook the entire time.
That's exactly right. Because the response to 9/11 was, oh, the neoconservatives are the ones who are going to save the day. They're going to save America from these naughty terrorists. When it turns out that not only are these people leftists, like they're literally communists, but they're also the ones who created, funded, trained, armed these terrorists in the Middle East. Yep. And that goes back to Minka Brzezinski's father, Jimmy Carter's, and Trump was talking about Jimmy Carter the other day, or in his Truth Post, talking about the Panama Canal. But Minka Brzezinski's father was the national security advisor who did Operation Cyclone, and he recruited a guy, a Saudi Arabian named Osama bin Laden, to create a thing called the Mujahideen to go fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. And in exchange, he said, we will build you madrasas, which are Islamic schools throughout the Middle East, to educate your children. And guess what they taught at those madrasas? The most radical form of Islam, which most Muslims at the time didn't even practice. The stuff that is like absolute junk, which is, by the way, look at your schools in America right now, people. Look at the stuff they're teaching your kids. It's the exact same dynamic. They're teaching your kids communism, even though that's not your value system. Same thing they did in the Middle East.
And what did you say was the time period for that specific deployment?
That was the late 70s. The late 70s is when they set up. So Jimmy Carter was 76 to 1980. That was his presidency. And so Brzezinski was the national security advisor at that time. And so that was when they did Operation Cyclone. And then in the 80s, you had Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen fighting the Soviets. Hollywood did that movie Charlie Wilson's War with Tom Hanks, where they like explain, "Ooh, we kind of like stumbled ass backwards into this thing, like whoops, like we gave rocket launchers to these guys. We didn't know they'd become terrorists." And it's like limited hangout.
What's so interesting is you're talking about the Middle Eastern theater of that subversion, and as many people who read the Substack know, Joe Lang has done a lot of writing about the Iran-Contra scandal, but besides the Iran-Contra scandal, the School of Americas. It's funny, you just mentioned American schools. But speaking of Brzezinski and subversion and training, the School of Americas was the exact template that you're describing in the Middle East, but in South America, in Venezuela, in Colombia. It was literally the exact playbook that was going hot all around the world at the same time, where you had, and again, the key here is that to bring everything back to narratives and storytelling, there are actuals, devastating actuals, that Ghost points out with, the jet fuel incident and so many others. Actuals are effective. The reason I do the show called The Narrative and talk about the war stories isn't because I don't believe actuals exist. I know that they exist. But even if a bunch of people are locked in a theater and burned alive, especially when that happens, it's extra important to pay attention to the story that is told to you about why that happened, because people do not emotionally attach to fictional stories the same way they attach to what they believe are true stories, right? So it can be entirely true that a bunch of people are locked in a theater and burned alive with jet fuel, that the Iranian people are like, if you doubted that story, you're a wacko conspiracy theorist to the Iranian people at that time, right? Because they know people that were affected. It happened. You're saying it didn't happen. Of course it happened. No, the story you're being told about why it happened is not true, which is the whole point. And then when you talk about schooling in the Middle East, the Mujahideen, I can never say that. Mujahideen,
yeah. They're tricky. The words are tricky, I know.
And then the South America, in the School of Americas, what is schooling? It's storytelling. They're teaching them histories. They're teaching them stories. They are telling them stories. And so these people, these kids that are coming out of the Contras, they are not human. They have been rendered something other than human through subversive storytelling at a very young age. They've got these sick psychos in the CIA that start it, that are their teachers, and that fund their teachers. But then the most effective forms, like you deal with this a lot in the Middle East, a lot of your research in the Middle East. Just because we're saying that the CIA founded or funded many of these Middle Eastern terrorist organizations, it doesn't mean that they don't then become organic, real terrorist organizations, right? You just need one generation, and then they're all true believer, actual Islamic extremists, which is why it can be true that Islamic extremists is a scourge in Europe right now, and that it's real, and that Westerners started it, which is really important to understand that distinction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, so think about the movie theater thing, like the Rex Theater incident. So the Iranian people had just learned months before this that their government was literally overthrown by the U.S. government, by the CIA, and their president, their Shah, was installed by the CIA. That they learned that, like, absolutely no doubt that was the truth, like because they got these documents from the CIA that were declassified.
Yeah.
But by the way, Mogaddesh was accused of being a communist by the CIA and by America because he wanted to nationalize the oil and basically reclaim control of the natural resources that he felt belonged to his people in the first place. So it's like that's kind of like a subversion of itself. Anyone who does that kind of thing just gets called a communist and they'll get lumped together. So then the people who are witnessing this, who knew people who died in the fire, who knew that this happened, they believe that the Shah's secret police, who were basically in cahoots with the CIA from their perspective, killed, like massacred their own people. And then you can see how when you combine that with the teachings from these madrasas and from all the other like subversive psychological warfare operations being run on the people by the CIA, how they would develop a hatred for the West and a hatred for the United States. And then you look at that exact same template and look at 9/11 and look at what they did with 9/11 and everything that happened after then. the two different sides, they're doing it to both sides, and they're teaching you to hate the other side and to basically froth at the mouth, demanding the mass murder of these other people. And it's like you want people to die now who probably have nothing to do with the people who are actually doing the bad stuff. They're just trying to live their life. But you're celebrating when their cities are being bombed and when they're all dying in mass because you believe that they actually like ideologically back this stuff because they happen to live in a region where this stuff is coming out of. When all of it's being mapped on and basically assigned to it through storytelling, and you don't even know if it's actually real or not. Like on some level, it could just be all narrative.
Yeah, and the 9/11 thing is especially, our generation. Obviously, everybody was affected by that, but I mean, we were coming of age. We were understanding reason and figuring out what the world was when that happened, and it was kind of our version of the JFK assassination, and that's one of the most interesting sort of rabbit holes to me, and I'm glad that we're at a stage in especially most conservative or at least MAGA audiences where we can have these kind of conversations, because one that we used to not be able to have, and I remember this as a lefty, when I would be pointing out that although Al-Qaeda was this terrorist organization, like getting away from even the 9/11 stuff, that was what the story was. I would kind of I had conservative family members. I had a uncle who served, did 2 tours in the early days of the war in the Middle East, and he was in the Battle of Fallujah. He played a big role in that, actually. You couldn't say this kind of stuff around him because they were losing friends to Al-Qaeda, right? But what you need to be able to do is reverse engineer that and at least map out thought experiments of, okay, what if my premise is false? What if you are these Al-Qaeda guys and you're in the Middle East and the world's most powerful empire comes for you and starts carpet bombing you and occupies your cities, and then, somebody dies, right? Uncle whoever dies. Then the nephew over there in Afghanistan sees his uncle get killed, and he's 11, and he doesn't know, like, oh, well, you see what's going on here is the CIA is blaming us for taking down the Twin Towers, so they think that it was us, so these American soldiers actually aren't the bad guys, they've all been psyoped. Like, all he cares about is that his uncle just got shot by an American soldier, right? So what's he gonna do? He's gonna grow up, and he's gonna kill that American soldier. And then that American soldier's friends are going to kill his friends. And then his friends are going to kill. It's so simple, but it is exactly what they want, right? They get the American soldiers over there on false pretenses. We have some in Badlands. I give a lot of shit to CanCon and Alpha, only because Alpha's an infiltrating Fed. But besides that, I like the guy. CanCon is just a bit of a silly goose. But what I respect is that those are guys who were in that war, that forever war, saw people die in that forever war, were directly affected by it for the rest of their lives, but are mature enough and strong enough to understand that the stories that prompted them into that war were bullshit. It doesn't mean that what happened in the war didn't happen. Of course it happened. But the reasons why something happened are vitally important to understand, which is all a story. And then to bring this to a point about Trump, one of the most encouraging theories that I believe, that I know you know a lot about as well, Kyle used to talk about this quite a bit, is the Doha Agreement and more broadly, Donald Trump dealing with some of these enemies in the American mind, such as Al-Qaeda, who, let's say, really became a massive enemy. The Taliban in particular became this enemy to America. They're a better analog. I should have been using them rather than Al-Qaeda. But when the Taliban became an enemy, even if they were manufactured as an enemy, that eventually becomes organic. So I think it's a huge white pill, and it sort of gives you a hint as to the battlefield, the narrative battlefield that Trump was navigating while trying to make peace with the Taliban, without looking like he's capitulating to them, to Americans, and while showing the Taliban some sort of face-saving humility where Trump probably had to concede, like, listen, we've got a lot of blood in this. We've got a lot of blood in this ledger. We have a lot of responsibility here for what's been done in the Middle East. It's not just what's been done to Americans. It's what's been done to the Middle East. And you can see why it's this, I've been referring to it as the Kobayashi Maru, like the impossible task of Trump getting these deals together in the Middle East because of just how much sheer bloodshed has been committed between both sides based on false storytelling.
Yeah. Well, and it's like what General Quast has told us at GARP before, where he says, war is basically something that never ends because it's a cycle. It's like what you just described. You kill them, and then there's always a someone who's left over, normally a family member, who now wants to come kill you. And it's just a cycle of vengeance and revenge that just goes in circles around and around and around. And what it requires, the only way to break it, is for one side to stop, swallow their pride, and say, you know what, I'm not going to seek vengeance on you. And then teach your children those values, ask for the other side to come to the table and be the bigger person, basically. And it requires tremendous strength. It requires tremendous courage. It requires a lot of strength because you have to convince all the people on your side to follow your lead and not indulge their own desires to seek vengeance. And it's so important. And that's what I think is the real strength of Donald Trump and what he brings to the table is he understands that. And he has at the very beginning, you were talking about what is Donald Trump. He is a cult of personality, but he's more importantly, he's a cultural phenomenon. And I think he is one of probably the only person who could have done something like this, where he is able to bring the entire country to a point where they are able, where all of these different factions of people are able to see what he's doing as something that's positive, and then the net effects of it all working out. And yeah, I mean, if you want, let's get back to that idea of what is Trump and TrumpaMania, because I think that is really, and like what's happening right now before we get into like Trump himself, because I think that's really, really fascinating. And the story being told right now is infinitely fascinating. Quick correction. Somebody in the chat said it's Mossadegh, not Mogadishu. That's correct. That was just me. That was my Irish tongue not being able to pronounce foreign words as well. So it's Mossadegh, not Mogadishu. That was the president who was overthrown in Iran.
Yeah, I mean, I was humiliating. I didn't want to put you on the spot, but everybody knew. I just want to highlight this person who's very upset. America 1871. You can tell it's a legit account when they've got 1871 right there in the name. I'm a clown. Shut up, BB. You are a clown. You gonna mute me? If you do, it will prove my point. I'm gonna mute you, but not yet. I'm going to let you punch yourself out a little bit. Then I'm gonna mute you. But sometimes I like doing that because these people don't understand that I enjoy this. I like this kind of back and forth. It raises my power level. Little do you know how Irish I truly am. And that it's like a feedback loop. It's my own internal Hegelian dialectic. So bring on the accounts that have never commented on a show before, but that show up organically when anybody says anything to pretend that they are totally earnest viewers. Before we get into the TrumpaMania stuff, you mentioned a little bit ago, one thing that's going on right now that I think is just a continuation of the current Trump game theory and art of the deal, art of war, etc., is the Panama Canal, the absolute mad lad. So just to show people a little progression here, and it really makes me think, you mentioned Panama earlier, I'm like, is this more than just trade deal stuff? Is Donald Trump engaged in narrative seeding and language coding, which is a different thing? Let's try to say earlier. Pay attention, guys, to language coding. The difference between narrative seeding is story seeding, right? Priming the pump for a certain story, which I would say in this case is about the Panama Canal and maybe where that spins out. Maybe that's trade routes. That's the Monroe Doctrine, right? There's a lot of things that go into narrative seeding. Language coding is different. Language coding, I would say, keep the word Panama in your mind, because Trump does this, I believe. He codes certain words into the War of Stories that are going to come up later and in a different context. And the first thing I thought of when I was like, oh, maybe Trump's just playing around with the Panama Canal. Now the Mad Lad has turned it into like the story of the weekend. He's doing this for a reason. And Panama Papers, I mean, I don't know. I'm just wondering if there's more to this. I want your thoughts on the Panama Canal, but I just want to show people, if you somehow missed this over the weekend, we've got Trump says Panama will lose control of the canal if it continues to rip off the U.S. He's talking about shipping fees, etc., talking about that it never should have been given away for $1 and all this, right? Then Panama responds, quote, every square meter of the Panama Canal belongs to Panama and will continue belonging to Panama. Trump says, we'll see about that. that was tonight. I don't know if you saw this earlier, Ghost. It was right before showtime. Then he repeats the Canada meme, basically, but with the Panama Canal, and says, welcome to the United States Canal, and slaps an American flag on what I assume is a photo of the Panama Canal. But man, to me, this is a story. Trump's going like A, B, C. He provokes, he seeds the problem. We should have control of the Panama Canal. He provokes the reaction from Panama, and then he guides us toward the solution. And you know, I think this is what we kind of want to talk about. Before we get into the history of Trump, the character, just how he's using that character right now. Some people think this is all just trolling, but we see that a little bit differently.
For sure. I mean, just when I read stuff like that, and I hadn't seen those posts until just now, which is why I laugh so hard, I think of like Kevin McAllister talking to the wet bandits and being like, I'm up here, you morons, like, come and get me. Like, that is exactly how I see it. Like that sort of stuff. I mean, obviously he knows that that's going to get the base riled up and it's going to get us fist pumping, which is great. But I think he's also trying to bait his enemies into falling into an emotional state, which is always where you're going to make a terrible mistake. As Sun Tzu says, if your enemy is of choleric temper, seek to irritate them. That's an adage that is repeated ad nauseum about Donald Trump. And that's a perfect example. And if you want to share my screen, I'll play a 40-second clip that I think kind of encapsulates how I view the current geopolitical struggle between Donald Trump and his enemies.
Before that, Ash, not only are our takes done, the whole brief is done and scheduled for Monday morning. So why don't you just get back in the kitchen? You should be, just like Ghost's wife is doing her duties right now. She is in the kitchen right now, literally cooking. Mrs. Wright better be. I caught her hood ratting the other night. I was the shock. I walked into the kitchen to hood rat in peace, me and the boys. And Mrs. Wright was already in there with the boys, like 1 a.m., hood ratting herself, snacking, which shouldn't be allowed. But anyway.
Ash, I was going to say pour yourself a drink. You just said to adhere to your word cap while she's in charge because she's taken over temporarily. The brief takes just got 500 words longer.
yeah, that's all you, Ash. It's now your burden.
It's now your burden. All right. So the context of this is from Game of Thrones. It's just a 40-second clip. And, kind of ignore the context. The guy who they're showing here actually is supposed to be, the earnest, I guess you'd say the good guy. But basically his army has just been defeated. This is the end of the battle. And let's watch what happens and we'll talk about it. And I'm only going to play 40 seconds because we don't need to watch the whole clip. Wait. Okay, so you can see that he's mortally wounded there. He's been struck in the leg. He was already limping before. He was already defeated. His army's been decimated. However, those two guys came upon him like, oh, this guy's wounded. Like, this will be an easy kill right here. And then they end up getting killed. This is exactly how I see the current situation. I see like we have an enemy where we talk about Patriots are in control, and I think that there's a game script, and I think that there are moves and counter moves and game theory is happening, and deployments are being made, and then there's a response, and then there's a recalibration, and then a new deployment is made, and the branches in the game theory model change based on the evolving patterns. Q even said in one of his posts, "We are not prophets. You are not a prophet. Nobody's a prophet. Be careful who you follow." And that to me says that while there is absolute control over certain things, it's not like God mode. It's not like a which is to me how you explain bad things happening,
right? And
because I think people kind of fall into this thing. Well, if Patriots are in control, then why did something bad happen? Like, why did these people die? Like, why did COVID happen? Like, why did And it's because I view it like the enemy has been mortally wounded. They are still limping across the battlefield. If you were to run up to them and say, "I'm going to take you on," you might get struck down. But right after this happens, this guy, is executed by one of the main characters. And that, that's the end of his storyline. But to that point, that's how I view the current situation with Donald Trump. I think that there is still an enemy out there, the cabal. I think they are mortally wounded, but they're still dangerous. There's still things they can do as this chess match plays out. They can still take pieces off the board, and that's why I think there's another Q post where they talk about how do you trap a cornered animal, and if you could imagine like a mortally wounded tiger, that's a fitting metaphor. Like if you're a bunch of cavemen surrounding the tiger because you have to take this thing out because it's coming and taking people out of your village, you all have spears. You got to be careful. This thing could still maul any one of you, but if you work together and you're patient and you kind of close in on it, you can take it out. But you got to work together, and there has to be strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. That I often use martial arts analogies, but there's one that reminds me of. Before I was fighting competitively, I was training, mostly for self-defense purpose. I just liked martial arts and found a trainer. I went through a few trainers, but the one I stuck with for the longest, who ended up being my coach for full contact fighting, he worked with like a Boston SWAT team, and he taught combatives to law enforcement and stuff like that. So it was more geared around real, kinetic situations, not just kickboxing and boxing in a ring and everything. It was more merging that into real kinetic scenarios. And his trainer was this guy named Otto, and he was this like little 125, 130 pound Greek dude, but he was like the most dangerous guy that I'd ever trained with. And a lot of it was mentality, but he used to talk about, he was a prison guard, then he worked security, private security, like contractor work, etc. And I remember he used to teach us, he used to show us film of like prison fights. And it was to explain the game theory inherent in group tactics, like instinctive group tactics. So, the obvious analog that you just make there is like you got a tiger cornered in a ravine. Well, you don't want to rush in there because it's still an extremely deadly animal. There's a Japanese proverb, I believe, that says even a wolf with no head can still bite. Like it's got one bite, and you don't want to be the one it bites. But one of the things that really stuck with me when I was a teenager is he said, in prison fights where there are weapons involved, like both sides have a shank or something, even if the outnumbered party loses and dies or something like that, there are always more injuries on the party that outnumbers the other one than the other way around. And oftentimes there are more serious injuries on the party that has the manpower advantage. So we would see some videos of this, but you'd have a situation where there'd be 5 guys would go into a cell and attack 2 prisoners, and all 7 would end up in the medical bay, but the 5 would have more injuries than the 2 that they attacked. And, you might look at that and say, okay, the obvious lesson to take away from that would be, well, those two guys were really desperate, so they're fighting with a lot more energy and attitude and killing intent, maybe. I think that that's part of it. But there was another thing that he said he called it wolfpack mentality, which is from studying animals and predators and how they take down more dangerous animals. No wolf wants to be the one that gets in front of the bear, right? Which is why there's an alpha. The alpha is the leader and is the one who always puts itself in the dangerous position. And that's what a lot of people don't know about. I used to be obsessed with predators, hence the tiger thing. The thing about alpha wolves is they're rarely the wolf that delivers the killing bite to what they're fighting. They're usually the wolf that puts themselves in the most dangerous position, and the other wolves attack from the sides.
To draw out the
draw the fire.
Yep.
Because they're confident and they don't even, it's not going to fight a bear, right? But they'll get in front of the bear or something like that. Humans don't instinctively do that. That's actually why we're very, very bad instinctive group fighters, which is kind of counterintuitive because humans are the most dangerous predator that's ever existed. If you have a hunting party of humans, of 5 humans, they have a huge advantage over a tiger because of our brains and because they've planned out the hunt, to your point. But if humans are put in a group combat situation, they're some of the worst creatures at fighting because no human is instinctively going to put himself in front of the thing that they're attacking because they all think that one of the other 4 guys is going to be the one that does it. And then what happens is, one of the things we talk about in game theory all the time is initiative. What you've lost when you're attacking an enemy that you outnumber, if you don't make the first move, is initiative. And now they know that you're coming to attack them, so they have the initiative. But, again, it's a long way of saying I think this is exactly what Trump does. I think he presents himself as wounded or sometimes as confused or sometimes inconsistent. And then he draws that enemy fire out. He finds out, sometimes I think what he's doing is he's kind of analyzing the pack and what's against him. He's like, all right, where is the real danger here? Which one is the alpha? Which are the ones I really have to look out for? And I think that that's what he's doing with this Panama stuff, Canada and Mexico. I've absolutely loved that recently. And, just in case anybody's wondering for a little update on how that's going, I don't think it's going to go as far as our boy Blue, but I think our boy True does have potential. So how's it going for Justin? A dumpster fire wrapped up in a cluster inside the chaos of Justin Trudeau's Ottawa. This, to bring it back to your point about Trump playing this wounded animal, right? Trump memeing on Justin Trudeau, literally, very literally, has caused a freefall collapse of the Canadian government over the last 2 weeks. That's how powerful the narrative deployments of Donald Trump are. And it's because the actual power projection he's going to have is so significant that his narratives have to be treated as if they are actuals. That's sort of, I think, something people miss. But yeah, that's the art of the deal. And the art of the deal only works if you've got something to back it up.
So true. I mean, think about the fact, like all the spiritual, I guess you'd say, victories that we have witnessed, and Trump isn't even technically back in office yet. And then, just looking at putting a cap on the long-winded example we both just gave about this hunting group. If you think about the hunting party being the Sovereign Alliance and being those different members being Putin and MBS right. and Xi, and they're all taking turns kind of like baiting the wounded animal toward them so the other guys can come in for a strike. That's kind of how what I see with the two main like pack leaders being Trump and Putin, and kind of playing different roles, because Trump has played more of a narrative role, whereas Putin, I think, has played a far more kinetic role, which is what I want to kind of get into and kind of demonstrate the story. Because I feel like, and I think this from reading all my brief takes, that that there is actually like a thread line that I've found through all this that includes Syria, that includes Africa, that kind of explains what's happening in the Middle East and why, I don't really even care about the actuals, because whether or not this stuff is actually happening on the ground doesn't really matter. I think a lot of it is, but not maybe all of it. I think the story is the most important. Like because if people believe it's happening, then that's ostensible
It's going to have
reality.
the same effect long term.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, well, before we get into, as I want to do the second half of the show about Trump the character and everything, but I am curious because so let's do this as our last section on the current story. Is the Middle East, Russia? I mean, just the international scene, I think, is the most interesting thing right now. I mean, it's what you and I are really drawn to. The domestic scene, for me, gets really repetitive. It's like, congressman did something stupid. Let's yell about it again. But and it's important stuff. It's more just I feel like the domestic scene is so wrapped up in if we're right about a Patriot plan, Congress is being exposed as not being on our side. Elections are fake. I mean, we've talked about this for years now, but we are seeing a realignment very literally going on internationally, and we tend to think that it's going to have long-term positive effects, but the story is absolutely chaotic in terms of how it's being translated to the Western mind right now.
For sure. And it seems very disconjointed, and it feels like none of these things actually are connected, but I think they actually are. Yeah. And I think it's important to understand is that the more I've dug into this, the more I've realized that in the 2000s, 20 years ago, there was a sovereign alliance. So we've actually seen this narrative play out before. The difference is back then, Putin wasn't necessarily a part of it because he was trying to cozy up to the West. He was trying to rebuild relationships with the West and reconnect Russia with Europe and America. Xi wasn't on the scene yet, so China was in bed with the neocons.
Right.
Iran was probably still controlled by the CIA completely.
Yep.
So those three countries, which happened to be the three countries that Mika Brzezinski's father said, if those three countries ever form an alliance, our global hegemony is dead. Yep. And that's what we've seen happen. So I really real quickly, I want to play. This is a little bit of a long video. I'm going to play it at 1.25 speed, but it's from the film Lawrence of Arabia from 1962. There's a lot of signal in this, and that film, by the way, was based on a book called The Seven Pillars of something or other, but it was an autobiography by Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia has connections to British intelligence. There's a lot of signs and evidence there that he actually was sent in as a subversive agent. But I think what ends up happening is he was a true believer. He was an archaeologist before he became an agent. And I think he ends up becoming endeared to these people and actually wants to help them. And then because of that, once they get screwed over after World War I, the group that you're looking at, these Arabs, who the British convinced to fight against the Ottomans, the Turks, they get screwed over. They're being told, we're going to give you your own nation. Of course, that doesn't even happen. The people in the scene actually get their kingdom taken away from them, and it's given to the Saudis. But you're going to hear a lot of things about the British, and there's a really, really great line about the Bedouin and about the desert. And then you also hear about Damascus and how important Damascus is. So we'll talk about this, and then I'll explain how Russia is tied in. But let me share my screen.
And by the way, did you see Putin's not that you watched the whole thing, but his 4-hour Q&A the other day? Because he mentions this. He basically talks about this and talks about Damascus. It's a pretty interesting signal. So this is very timely and definitely tied in, as Ghost says.
Yes, and shout out to Dirk McGurk, because I know that he says all the time this is his favorite movie. He's been wanting y'all to do this on Story Hour forever. It's a 3-hour movie, but I feel like this scene basically encapsulates the whole movie. And this actor, by the way, who's on screen right here, this is the guy who plays Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars.
Oh,
yeah. So these are real characters. The only one who's not real is the younger looking Arab guy in the background who keeps barking at the British guy. He's not a real character, but everyone else in the scene is an actual real character. And apparently this stuff actually happens. So whatever that means. But let's watch and we'll enjoy it. And I have it at 1.25.
Yes, Colonel.
I want a decision, sir.
You want me to fall back on yellow?
Well, you're not doing much good here, sir. I'm sorry to rub it in, sir, but we can't supply you here.
You could supply us through Aqaba.
Aqaba? Well, if you can get hold of Aqaba, sir, of course we can supply you. But you can't.
You could.
You mean the Navy? The Turks have 12-inch guns at Aqaba, sir. Can you imagine what that means?
Yes, I can imagine.
Put that out of your mind, sir. The Navy's got other things to do.
Oh, yes, protecting the Suez Canal.
The one essential sector of this front is and must be the canal. You can see that, sir, surely.
I see that the canal is an essential British interest. It is of little consequence to us.
I must ask you not to speak like that, sir. British and Arab interests are one and the same.
Possibly.
Ha! Ha! Upon my word, sir, you're ungrateful. Fall back on Yenbo and we will give you equipment, give you arms, advice, training, everything.
Guns?
A modern rifle for every man.
No, guns. Artillery. Guns like the Turkish guns at Medina.
Yes, give us guns and keep the training.
Your men need training far more than guns, sir.
The English will teach the Bedou to fight?
We will teach them, Sheriff Ali, to fight a modern mechanized army.
Yes, Lieutenant. What do you think about Yenbo?
I think it is far from Damascus.
We'll have you in Damascus, and never fear.
Have you been in Damascus, Mr. Lawrence?
Yes, my lord.
It is beautiful, is it not?
Very.
That'll do, Lawrence. Dreaming won't get you to Damascus, sir, but discipline will. Look, sir, Great Britain is a small country, it's much smaller than yours. Small population compared with some. It's small, but it's great. And why?
Because it has guns.
Because it has discipline.
Because it has a navy. Because of this, the English go where they please and strike where they please, and this makes them great.
Right. Yes. Mr. Lawrence, that'll do. Lieutenant Lawrence, sir, is not your military advisor.
But I would like to hear his opinion.
Damn it, Lawrence, who do you take your orders from?
From Lord Faisal, in Faisal's tent.
Old fool! Why turn from him to him, their master and man?
My lord, I think your book is right. The desert is an ocean in which no oar is dipped. And on this ocean, the Bedou go where they please and strike where they please. This is the way the Bedou has always fought. You're famed throughout the world for fighting in this way, and this is the way you should fight now.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm sorry, sir, but you're wrong. Fall back on Yenbo, sir, and the Arab Rising becomes one poor unit in the British Army.
What is this to you?
Lawrence, do you know you're a traitor?
No, Colonel. He is a young man, and young men are passionate, but they must say their say. But wiser people must decide. I know you are right.
Very well, sir. When shall we move? The sooner the better. You'll lose another 50 men tonight.
You tread heavily, but you speak the truth. I will give you my answer tomorrow, and now it is late. Colonel Brighton means to put my men under European officers, does he not?
In effect, my lord, yes.
And I must do it, because the Turks have European guns. But I fear to do it. Upon my soul, I do. The English have a great hunger for desolate places. I fear they hunger for Arabia.
Then you must deny it to them.
You are an Englishman. Are you not loyal to England?
To England and to other things.
To England and Arabia, both? And is that possible? I think you are another of these desert-loving English. Dati, stand up. Gordon of Khartoum. No Arab loves the desert. We love water and green trees. There is nothing in the desert. No man needs nothing. Or is it that you think we are something you can play with? Because we are little people, a silly people, greedy, barbarous, and cruel. What do you know, Lieutenant? In the Arab city of Cordoba were 2 miles of public lighting in the streets when London was a village.
Yes, you were great.
9 centuries ago.
Time to be great again, my lord.
Which is why my father made this war upon the Turks. My father, Mr. Lawrence, not the English. But my father is old. And I long for the vanished gardens of Cordoba. However, before the gardens must come the fighting. To be great again, it seems that we need the English or what no man can provide, Mr. Lawrence. We need a miracle.
All right, so there's a lot of things that happen in that scene, and it's the background, the history of it is absolutely fascinating. Actually, if you want to reshare my screen, I want to show you this map. So Lawrence is the guy, obviously, that was speaking. This guy Faisal was the guy he was speaking to, Prince Faisal. He mentioned his father was the old man who was actually the king of the Arabs, who was leading the revolt. What's interesting is that this movie was filmed in 1961, like 25 years after Faisal died. So they actually had people, as I read into it, they actually had people who were on set with them who were servants of Faisal. And they said that the guy's name escapes me, the guy who played Alec Guinness. They said that he literally, they thought they were like seeing Faisal's ghost, like the way that his euphemisms, like the way he spoke, like the way he captured kind of like his humanity. Like they said that it was a perfect encapsulation. It was amazing that he never actually met him, because he just did this all on like accounts that were told to him. So what ends up happening, the miracle that they're talking about is, they're asking the British to give them artillery, and the British were like, no chance we're going to give you artillery, but we will give you training because we want you to become a Prussian-styled army, which is what the British were. They were a Prussian-styled army. And so what Lawrence does, and this is what makes him like kind of the folk hero that he becomes, is he decides he's going to lead 50 men up from Yembo to this desolate part of the desert, and he has to cross to descend down an Aqaba. Now they have to cross a part of the desert that is considered by the Arabs cannot be traversed. And to the extent that the Turks who are defending Aqaba have all of their weapons and all of their artillery pointed south, expecting the British to come up through here with ships, they have no guns pointed north. So they were like convinced that nobody was going to cross this desert and come up here. Up here in the desert, there is this guy named Aouda Abu Taye. And so this guy, what he had done is he was basically murdering Ottoman tax collectors who were preying on all the Arabs down there and basically like squeezing every penny out of them. And so he was forced to go live in the desert by himself. You mentioned, like they mentioned, the British, what made them great was that they had these ships and they could sail anywhere in the world and nobody could stop them. And then what Lawrence points out, he says, but what makes you great, the Bedouin, is that you can cross the desert. Nobody else can do that. You have the knowledge and the skill set to cross the desert and go where nobody else.
This is all the analog. This is all analogous. Well, rather, the Dune series is analogous to all of this with the Fremen and the Fremen and everything. It's the same kind of thing, right? The British have naval power and ocean power. The Bedouin have desert power.
Yep. And so the idea was like to marry the two. And so he goes up there, he meets with this guy, Abu Taya, and he says, look, I'm going to take Aqaba. If you help me take it, I promise I will give you all the gold that's there. And we don't have to watch the scene. I had the scene queued up, but basically what ends up happening is they take the city, and then they go into like where all the treasure chests are. They open up the treasure chests, and it's nothing but paper money. And this guy is sitting there throwing the paper money in the air going, what is this worthless paper? Like, where's all the gold? And it's like this desert savage had the foresight to understand that this fiat currency was absolutely worthless. And so what ends up happening is that Lawrence has to go to Cairo on camel, get a bunch of gold, bring it back to him in order to maintain his allegiance. But I just thought there was so much signal there because, we talk about Bitcoin, we talk about fiat, the fiat petrodollar, and all of this is being filmed and told in 1961, and it's just as relevant today. They talk about Damascus being this like great jewel of the Middle East, which is absolutely true, and that's a big reason why it's so desired by certain forces in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I think the Damascus thing again. It's we could do you could do years of shows on this stuff, obviously, but. These are the sorts of signal when I use the term language coding, another word for it might be signal. And I think a lot of people that watch these shows, if you're in the info war, one of the things I often say in my commentary is that if you even know that there is an info war happening, you're in it, by definition. And one of the things that separates quote unquote anons from normies is pattern recognition. So another way to think of language coding, it doesn't mean that every time you see what you think is language coding that it's going to end up manifesting in some way that makes sense to you, but to just file things away. So when Ghost is talking about all the background here, just pay attention to figures that may or may not be in what we theorize as a sovereign alliance when they start coding certain concepts, certain words, literal words, ideas, and storylines into the public narrative. It's pretty interesting that a few days ago, Vladimir Putin held a 4-hour Q&A section. He does like an end of year state of the Russian Union, basically, where it's an open exchange between the president and the press. Imagine if we had that. It's kind of funny. This Russian dictator, from what we're told, sits down and is just asked questions and speaks for 4 hours instead of giving a canned speech on TV to clapping seals in Congress. But one of the things he talked about in that section was Damascus, reaffirming Russia's commitment to Syria. And, you've talked about that a lot. And, I started my Russia rabbit hole not about Middle Eastern stuff, but it eventually brings me back there. And I think I've said, maybe not on the show with you, but when I was training, I was Russia pilled in a way I didn't even recognize until way in hindsight by the Russians I was training with. But one of them was a Spetsnaz soldier who fought against Al-Qaeda in the early 90s. And he was saying that the CIA funded them so that he was fighting the CIA. And he was telling me, the CIA doesn't want the Russians and the Middle Easterners to be friendly because when we're friendly, it's a strong alliance. And, he was blackpilled at that time. I was training with him around 2010. He was blackpilled because he's like, you guys are under Obama. You're going to go to war with us. Like, unfortunately, we're going to be enemies is what all the Russians were thinking at that time. But, you can sort of see, as we said earlier in the show, the mythic, Putin literally used the term, the mythic Russian villain, the mythic Russian enemy a few days ago, in reference to the version of Russia that Americans have been programmed with. So we've got this mythic Russian enemy on one side, we've got this American empire on the other, and then in the middle, we've got the chaos zone of the Middle East. But what if the Middle East wasn't a chaos zone, right? Like, that's what some of these analogs show, some of these stories show. There's a reason that the powers that be have needed the Middle East to be this absolute zone of chaos, because otherwise it can be a zone of unity where East and West actually come together through the Middle East, which obviously characters like Mohammed bin Salman it seems a little bit more positive and optimistic of what's happening there now.
Yeah. Well, and so Mohammed bin Salman is a, like, we're probably not going to get much into him here tonight, but that's a fascinating redemption arc because of course the guy we saw on screen, Faisal, his family ruled Medina and the whole coastline there, Medina and Mecca, for 700 years. They were the caretakers of it, and they were considered great people who fed the starving and took care of people and had like a very hospitable like view of humanity. And then of course that was taken away from them by the British and given to the Saudis. So I view like what MBS is doing now is kind of bringing this all full circle. The Hashemites are now in Jordan and kind of bringing the Hashemites back into the fold, taking them away from the CIA because they've been under like threat of life. Like they cut up their family back in the 50s. And I think like King Abdullah there, he basically lives under the threat. Like, we're going to kill you and your children if you ever speak out against us or do anything like we did to your uncles. So I think MBS is liberating them and kind of bringing them back into the fold and liberating the whole region. But there's a specific narrative here where Trump and Putin tie directly into what's happening in Syria. And if I could, I'd like to share that real quick, and then we can kind of riff on it before we get into Trump's history. Share my screen, and I'll just keep this in the back of your mind. We won't go down this rabbit hole, but I've done this on Badlands Daily many times. But Executive Order 13818, this is the one where if you're doing human trafficking, if you're doing child slavery, Trump took your property. One of the guys targeted Dan Gertler. He was an Israeli oligarch who controlled all the mining rights in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's a country right in the middle of Africa where there's trillions and trillions of dollars of rare earth minerals. He was using child slaves to work those mines. And also his family is, he's the scion of the Israeli diamond cartel. His family was the same family that was working with De Beers doing the stuff in Sierra Leone. So if you've ever seen Blood Diamond, there are articles written and by bloggers and stuff who've done the digs on this, where his family is the one who was doing all this stuff in Blood Diamond, which is a different country, but the same thing that you see in Blood Diamond, that's his family doing that. So this is a powerful oligarch. Here,
but just as a side note on that, Ghost, I'm sure, speaking of Signal and who knows, just file stuff away. Something I even saw going viral on like lefty Twitter feeds was claims coming out of some of these African nations toward Apple, in particular, when it comes to labor. I think a lot of us know that there's the term slave labor gets used a lot, but when you reference blood diamonds and the more direct, knowing participation in very literal slavery, it will be really interesting to see if major American corporations are directly exposed to the American people for active participation in the slave trade.
Well, and just as another side note about horseshoe theory, I mean, people think like, how are we ever going to get these militant leftists to like see the light? Imagine a story about like slavery becoming mainstream, where it's like these people are using actual black children to work these mines, and they're working them to death. What do you think?
And
that's
they know,
do?
and that they know, like it's
they
not
know,
this, like, oh, they're outsourcing, like they don't know what's going on. It's like no, the claims coming out are that Apple is well aware of where this stuff is sourced and how.
That's when the pit bull turns around and bites the master, I think, in my opinion. But
continue. But I thought that was an interesting analog.
Well, so you mentioned the Panama Papers earlier. There was another similar leak called the Paradise Papers, and that's where we learned actually that Dan Gertler, this guy right here, was extracting all this money out of Africa and then disseminating it like an ATM to all of his friends, all of his oligarch friends. He was basically just he was like an ATM, just giving all the cash to all them. So shutting him down pissed off a lot of people, like when Trump did that. And then, of course, I mean, this audience probably recalls back in May, this failed coup by this American, where him and his son go into the DRC and try to retake control of it. And this all ties into what I'm about to explain. It's all connected to that. So how does Putin tie into all this? Well, if I come over here, these are some really fascinating white papers that were written by, what we would consider our adversaries, published earlier this year. And they compiled all this research. Here are their sourcing: the Atlantic Council, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, and basically they're trying to present this information as nefarious. Like, this is, look at what Russia's doing. Look at this imperialism that Russia's doing. Everywhere you see on the map right here, this is the Wagner Group operating in Africa. So you see disinformation campaigns by Russia, political influence and disinformation campaigns by Wagner Group. The little pink guy right here is the Wagner Group actually physically being on the ground fighting or training like locals to fight the UN and fight NATO, who have been there raping children, kidnapping children. Those stories have been out since 2015 by whistleblowers. Yeah. And so you actually have Russia on the ground fighting back against this stuff, driving these people like out off continent. And I think we've talked about it on DPH when I've come on, but now you have basically the very last vestiges of European colonialism being driven off continent. I think the last little group is in Chad now, and they're about to be kicked out. But all of those groups, everything you're seeing operate right here, all of this, the entire continent, Wagner Group is operating out of two bases, and those two bases are located in Syria. And if these two names look familiar, if you've been following the news stories, these massive explosions that you're seeing that like are filmed at nighttime, and they're like, this is the biggest explosion ever recorded, whatever, like on film. Those explosions are happening in Tartus, and then we saw that that Assad put out that narrative the other day, where he put out that statement saying, I haven't been able to speak because of security reasons, but
Right.
I took refuge in this Russian airbase in Latakia, which is this airbase right here, and there were drone strikes striking the building, and we had to, the Russians forced me to board a helicopter to get out of there quickly because the base was about to be overrun. These two bases were bombed out by effectively NATO and the IDF, through their proxies, HTS and Al Qaeda. And so basically what's happening is the oligarchs were trying to drive Russia out of these two bases, because these are the two bases where Wagner Group is operating from, to take control, or not take control, but basically release control of Africa from these oligarchs and give it back to the people. And I've been writing about this like daily on the news brief. There's some actual like heroes, African people who are standing up, leaders who are standing up for their people and fighting back against the UN and NATO. And so it's interesting now that you have Wagner Group being kicked out of Syria. They're moving. The story now is that they're moving to Libya, and they're going to start operating out of Libya. Lavrov has come out and said, we're not abandoning these bases. Like, these bases are going to be ours. Right now there's some conflict happening, but we don't intend to leave. We're here to stay. But that's the thread line that I see right here. I mean, there's obviously Damascus and the desire to control Damascus, and we've seen narrative come out about certain leaders in Israel who said they want to see Damascus under Israeli control. They want to see Greater Israel implemented. So that element is there too. That narrative is out there. But this is also about getting Wagner Group out of the Middle East so they can stop operating in Africa and they can retake control of the resources in Africa.
That's so one of the things, and this is all just, sometimes you have to split your mind into different rails. And one of the ways that I do that is by saying, okay, like, let me look at it all as a story as it's unfolding. That means I don't have to worry about whether or not I think it's real or fake. By that, I mean, what's transpiring, what we're being told has been transpiring on a kinetic level in Syria. One of the interesting patterns there is when you see things the way that we do when it comes to a sovereign alliance, Russia, etc., then the narrative deployments of people like Sergei Lavrov take on added signal. So when he comes out and he uses the term maneuver in direct reference to the quote-unquote abandonment of some of the bases that you reference, he said these were planned Russian maneuvers. Now, he just didn't use the third word that we would use there, which is Russian maneuver defense. So again, this is when you just file these things away. It's like, that's interesting. We've been writing about Russian maneuver defense a lot lately. Sergei Lavrov comes out, smiles, and says, he literally said, I understand why Western media would think that, but these were planned Russian maneuvers. On the normie layer, they can understand the words he's saying, but on the anon layers, you can understand that he's telling you this was our op, not theirs. And then to add a layer to it, I'm somewhat shocked that this didn't get more play, especially in our circles. CENTCOM hit 70-something targets in central Syria directly on the back of this operation. We are told, according to CENTCOM, that there were no known civilian casualties. Let's just say that this all happened as reported. There were no known civilian casualties. There were no Syrian military casualties because Assad had withdrawn. And there were no Russian casualties or Russian equipment destroyed. So if you look at the way everything is played out in Syria, even if you don't go into all the history that you're going into in Africa, that's when you start deep diving and you figure out what's actually happening. But just looking at the progression of the central narrative of Syria, the media admitted that it made no sense that there was basically no resistance from Assad's forces. There was no resistance from Putin's forces Trump is up there like joking around about how Putin stretched too thin in Ukraine, so he had to get out of there. And then Lavrov, with a smile, is referencing Russian maneuver defense. And then CENTCOM just takes advantage of the situation and orders precision airstrikes on 70-something targets in Syria. And they called them ISIS strongholds, right? So you're like, what this was, if you believe these events happened, was sovereign alliance maneuver defense, not just Russian maneuver defense. It was the Russians and the Syrians withdrew in a tactical withdrawal, and then U.S. forces struck the targets, which is also a devolution proof. And it was like nobody was talking about that. They're just talking about like, oh man, look, apparently there's regime change in Syria. Oh, I guess CENTCOM like did a mass bombing raid too. Like, guys, CENTCOM doing a mass bombing raid is a huge deal, by the way. But nobody seemed to be talking about it, right? But it's again, the media is probably not talking about it for specific reasons, because they would have to go ask the Biden White House about all of the Syrian air raids by CENTCOM. And the Biden White House probably has no idea that was going on because they're not involved in any of this stuff. But, you know, your larger trend you're pointing out here is something that besides Russia, you know, Russia's kinetically backing these good coups and overthrows in Africa and in the Middle East. But China, Xi Jinping is financially backing a lot of these African nations through the Belt and Road Initiative, et cetera. And I know that your co-host, Matt Ehret, writes about that quite a bit as well. So this is, you know, Xi and Putin have been backing like the reemergence of the global South onto the world stage. They've been kicking the French out of Africa. China is onboarding them. And that's the stuff that a lot of right-wing commentators have totally lost the plot on. And they think it's this thing where the CCP is gaining control of Africa, not understanding that, as you're pointing out, this is actually China and Russia freeing Africa from Western globalist control.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, if you look at this map here, the black is ISIS, 2015, 2016. What happened here? Putin and Trump destroyed ISIS in a matter of weeks. And there was literally news stories where Trump talked about that. He's like, yeah, Putin and I talked and we agreed that we were going to, they did like a joint announcement. They're like, yeah, we're going to actually work together now to destroy ISIS. And weeks later, ISIS was completely eviscerated. And then of course, 1 month after Trump leaves office, ISIS returns. And so these are the camps these are the places where they're bombing that you're talking about. And, you know, going back to the Sovereign Alliance, I talked about the Sovereign Alliance existing 20 years ago. This is a plan from 2004 that Assad had called for after he came into power. And I say came into power, his father was the ruler for 25 years or whatever. He was a doctor. His older brother was supposed to be the guy. His brother gets killed. His dad asks him to step up and become the guy. He begrudgingly does it. And he's like, all right, well, if I'm going to do this, like, we're going to do it the right way. Like, we're going to focus on prosperity. Here's like the Belt and Road Initiative, basically way before that even existed, that we're going to build this massive railway system throughout the Middle East. It's going to develop prosperity. And this was one of the
Central Asia is so rich in resources, and they've been controlled as well. So they're going to join right in with the Middle East.
Yeah. So this is one of the reasons he had to go. The other guys that were in that alliance were Gaddafi. We saw what happened to him, dragged out of his castle and murdered, and then Hillary Clinton laughed about it. Saddam Hussein was part of that alliance. There are a number of others, but those guys didn't have the power. They didn't have the kinetic power projection to back up like the moves they were making, which is why they all ended up getting killed. And I think what they wanted to happen here is they wanted Assad to get captured, dragged out on camera, and murdered the same way Gaddafi was. And the Russians basically saved him. And now to your point, it's like the Russians and the Chinese and others, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are backing these African nations, helping them get up on their 2 feet so they can stand on their own and fight back against the hegemony that is literally kidnapping their children and forcing them to work in mines as child slaves.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I agree with everything you laid out, and that I have a very slightly different way of looking at what's going on with Syria, or some of these things, and it's a little bit more, you know, maybe I check myself because it sounds like hopium. In terms of it's all on an actual basis, it's all exactly as you're pointing it out. I think that is what's happening mechanistically. But when I look at the events in Syria, I look at that as much less of a situation that is unfolding that the Sovereign Alliance is then responding to, and much more, because of the order of events, as something that the Sovereign Alliance provoked.
Yes, I actually agree with that. I agree with that.
That's the only, and I think I see that in a little bit more theater, or at least I believe that or project it in some more theaters. So I totally agree with what you said about, Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. These guys didn't have the kinetic power projection to get this stuff further down the line. Now, I believe that Putin has been, we know for a fact that Putin has been allied with these guys for a long time, right? So then you'd go, okay, well, why? This is where devolution comes in. This is in my opinion, the stuff we're talking about right here is the real reason for devolution. I'm not saying it's not about the election. I'm not saying it's not about the American awakening. It is about those things. But I genuinely believe those things are secondary to the real purpose for the devolution operation. The devolution operation, in my view, is that did Saddam, did Gaddafi, did Assad have allies with power projection capabilities? They did. They had Russia. But why didn't that save them? Well, think of it this way. If Russia got involved more than they already were at that time period, US versus Russia, World War III, end of Western civilization as we know it, end of Russian civilization as we know it. We know that Barack Obama was provoking Vladimir Putin throughout his administration, and we all know, infamously, Hillary Clinton was salivating at the thought of sparking a kinetic war with Russia. So I think that these Middle Eastern Sovereign Alliance players, they had Russia on their side. Later on, they get Xi Jinping on their side, so they get China on their side. Now, whether or not China is a real kinetic power player is a matter up for significant debate in the military community. I have military family members who take Russia very seriously. They do not take China seriously. Now, that may or may not be fair. But economically, China is extremely formidable. But why are things going better now? Why is Assad not dead right now? Why did Russia go into the Donbass? Why are these African nations being freed? I think it's because of devolution. Russia is taking the kinetic lead here on an actual basis, but they are only doing so because they have the assurance that the United States military is not going to go after them during this operation. Yep. And you can bet your ass that I think we're going to have to pay that back. With all the stuff you're talking about with some of these operations and all of the literal combat that Russia has been involved in, the Western world is going to have to do their part as well. What form that takes, I don't necessarily know. But, it's not that you don't frame it that way. I think that not enough people talk about the devolution operation related to what's going on over here and why is this stuff turning out better these days? Why did they not get Assad? Why are things not going their way over there? I think it's because Vladimir Putin is making his moves. The reason he's making his moves is he knows the United States military is not going to be sent against him in the ultimate false flag, which would provoke World War III.
No, I actually think you nailed it. This is actually a situation where I think that like Chris and Patrick's framing of things being fake and not actually happening could be very much the case. I said when I was writing about this on the news brief a week ago that Assad was in Moscow the weekend this all started to pop off, and I speculated whether or not he ever even went back to Syria to begin with. So he could have just been in Moscow the entire time. They're feeding us this narrative that he was, oh my God, he had to run to Latakia and hide out in this airbase, and then we had to exfil him out like in a helicopter, and it was this dramatic moment, and that's just a story we're being told. Yeah. But I completely agree with you. This is like, again, Kevin McAllister stepping back and allowing the wet bandits to occupy the space where he controls everything, and it's all booby trapped. And now what's the net effect? The net effect is that the Western media is saying that Al-Qaeda is the good guy. And actually these people who did 9/11 25 years ago, they're actually the good guys. And they were, they've changed. They've grown since then. And we shouldn't hate them anymore. And they're actually our ally now. And they are the legitimate government in Syria. It's not Assad. It's actually the guys who did 9/11. That's literally what is being said and being framed by leftists in the media.
And they're backed by the Jews. They're backed by Israel.
Yeah.
It's like, I had to read that so many times to be like, wait, hold on. This is where the story is right now. The Jews are backing Islamic terrorists in an overthrow of a Russian-backed sovereign. Yes, that's what's happening. So I see the Al-Qaeda stuff as more of a psyop, but I see the ISIS layer as the actual. When you bring up like that, that's how I try to reconcile those things of saying, well, if ISIS sees Assad, they're seeing all the same news we are, right? So that's the maneuver defense. The maneuver defense is also narrative. They think Assad is turning tail and running to Moscow, right? What happens? ISIS comes out of its holes. In Syria, boom. There you go. So we'll see where it goes from here. I know you wanted to share this.
Yeah, we don't have to play the video, but I can just explain what's happening here. This is from the 4.5 hour Q&A he did, and this was framed by some media outlets as Putin basically lying and being like, we accomplished our mission in Syria, like we didn't, basically trying to CYA or basically trying to spin what happened there. But what he actually says, if you listen to the clip, and this is like the 4.5 minute, we don't want to listen to a 4.5 minute clip. But what he says is, look, we went in there 10 years ago. We prevented ISIS from becoming the rulers of Damascus. Like that actually was the truth. Like an Islamic State didn't ultimately prevail as the ruling government in Syria. And now we have these new people who are controlling who are in control now, and they most certainly aren't terrorists, right, guys? That's literally how he says it. He looks in the camera and he's like, right, guys? Like, these people are good people, right? CNN, right? MSNBC.
They're LGBTQ plus terrorists.
Yeah, like he's like baiting them. He's saying it in a very tongue-in-cheek, where he's literally winking at the camera as he's saying it. He's daring, because what he's saying is, if you're going to say that these guys are good guys, then you also have to say that Russia accomplished its mission in Syria because we ultimately allowed these good guys to take control. He's baiting them into saying, actually, these are really, really bad guys. These are Al-Qaeda. These are the guys who did 9/11, etc. They haven't done that yet.
That what you just encapsulated is exactly what I'm saying about narrative Russian maneuver defense. And it's what Trump uses, to your point, to Kevin McAllister's point. It's what Trump uses expertly, better than anybody. And that's exactly, I keep using the analog of the Kobayashi Maru, the impossible task. It's not just saying, oh, the Middle East is an impossible task. I'm saying on a narrative layer, the story of untangling the Middle East is an impossible task because so many actual damages have been done that you can't just come out and be like, as Trump, and be like, oh, we're friends with Al-Qaeda now. We're friends with the Talibros. You just can't. People just aren't there. They're not there. They're not going to get it. They're not going to get what you're doing. It has to look like, you know what? Let's let bygones be bygones. We're going to sign peace deals with our former adversaries. Like, that's how the story is going to be translated. But in the interim, what you're pointing out with Putin, he is showing them in that little exchange, we, the Sovereign Alliance, the Ghost in the Machine, have put you in a completely impossible narrative position. You have two choices. You are either anti-Semitic or anti-Islam.
Yeah.
You are trapped in a story right now where you have
anti-Russia.
Yeah, anti-Russia. Where you have Jews backing Islamic extremist takeovers.
Yep.
Like, you're saying, that's the story.
Yeah. Yep.
So
and you're saying it's a good thing, and by saying that, you also have to say that Russia accomplished its mission and did a good thing in Syria.
Well, I would say
want to do
exactly, and I would say you don't even. It's even more brilliant because I don't think you even have to go to the Russia layer. You could keep this at Assad, right? So what are the media's choices right here? They've got to look at this. Let's keep it on Syria. The story of the Syrian regime change with Assad. The media basically has to come to a conclusion to their audience of this is good or bad. Assad has been overthrown. Is this good or bad? So let's say they say it's good, which is kind of where they initially wanted to go with the story. Well, now they're saying it's good that Islamic extremists have taken over Syria. Now, if they say it's bad, this is where Israel comes in and where I think we've got control of Bibi Netanyahu. Because there is no way that a psycho like that, if he's operating under his own auspices, throws in publicly with Al-Qaeda. Like, I just don't think you do that on a narrative level unless you're being guided that way, or maybe he got forced into it, right? So without even bringing Russia into it, if the media turns on the overthrow in Syria, they have to say that they want Assad back.
Yes. Oh,
they have to reverse engineer because
yeah.
Assad is the one who was fighting all of these people.
Yes.
And they're not even allowed to say that they're both bad. Like, that would be probably their best outcome, right? Like, oh, well, Assad was bad, but so is Al-Qaeda. They now can't say that this guy in Al-Qaeda and this regime is bad because Israel is backing them. So now if they say that, they have to say Israel bad.
Yes.
So it's just like,
exactly.
and that, I think that's what Putin, to your point in that clip, I think that's what he's doing, is he's saying, like, you guys either have to say that this regime change operation is a terrorist operation that is bad, that is funded by the Jews, or that it's good. And, like, those are not, you are not allowed to say that, basically, as the media. Of course, the alternative is that you could say the truth, which is that the Jews, I'm saying Israel, is funding regime change operations against sovereign leaders, and have been for most of the last century, and have never been our friends. Like, you could say that, but you're not allowed to say that. Even Donald Trump is not allowed to say that, which is why he doesn't take... Putin is kind of our guy right now in the public narrative, because he's in a position where he doesn't lose anything by calling Israel out for any of the stuff that it's doing. He doesn't need the same narrative shielding that Trump does, because, like, Charlie Kirk will get really mad at Donnie if Donnie says that it's not good that Bibi Netanyahu is openly cheering on Islamic extremist terrorism in Syria.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of the situation we're in.
And by the way, what was Trump's advice at the beginning of all this? Stay out of it. He's like, stay out of it. That's my advice. Take it
Kobayashi Maru. Yeah.
Kobayashi Maru. But you know what? They've jumped in both feet into the pool, and it turns out the pool's full of piranhas.
Well, that's why, again, on an actual level, this looks like it was Russian maneuver defense. But on a narrative level, it was Russian maneuver defense. Like you said, go ahead, guys, jump in, right? This is good, right? You got Assad out there. This is good. And then they jump all the way in, and they're like, shit. We're trapped in a story where we are endorsing Al-Qaeda and admitting that the Jews are backing them. Like, this is, where do we go from here? And Putin is just saying, like, I don't know, guys.
The clip, man. It's like, you're trapped in here with them, man.
Yeah, exactly.
TrumpaMania, baby.
All right, our second half, it doesn't have to be a half of the show, but look, I do want to talk about, we've talked around it a lot in terms of Donald Trump and maneuver defense and all of this. These characters, we kind of went backwards. We went through a lot of the characters who are part of this, but something you talk about a lot in the news brief. By the way, if anybody watching the show is not subscribed to the Substack, the Badlands Substack is free. There is the Daily Brief show on the Rumble channel that Ash and Patrick do. They often add their own commentary, but there is a news brief that goes out to your email every Monday through Friday. Myself, Ghost, and Ash work on that every night and add commentary, add kind of our commentary on some of the biggest news items of the day. If you've been following it, one of the running themes in Ghost commentary is TrumpaMania. We all talk about this to varying degrees. Trump as a character. My favorite analog to it is the Dark Knight trilogy and the Bruce Wayne and everything. But you talk about it more from a longer term perspective. And a little bit more literal with the TrumpaMania stuff regarding his history with the WWE. You know, I know Kyle used to talk about Kayfabe and everything. A lot of these key learnings from the world of combat sports entertainment, whether it's WWE or UFC. But just kind of go wherever you want to. But this idea of TrumpaMania and these characters that are involved and how you see it working. And maybe a place to start would be, where do you think this stuff started and how much of a part of the plan is it?
Yeah, I'll do you one better, man. I will help connect. I'm not only going to help connect like the WWE kayfabe stuff, the origins of all that, but I'm going to connect us directly to that casino that you and Kyle always talked about in Atlantic City, where Trump went to the FBI and said, hey, I want to build this casino. And they said, you know, there's better ways to invest your money. And he's like, yeah, I don't really care. Like, I want to build this casino. I want you to help me build it. And then after I build it, I want you to come work in the casino as undercover agents. And I'm going to bring the mob in and you're going to catch all of them. And that, I mean, I've gone and read the documents. That's what he said to him. So let's start this conversation by playing the, I have right here a clip. So this is in 2013, Trump was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and he gave a speech, and I'm going to put this at 1.5 speed because it's we don't have to watch the whole thing. I can probably cut it off at a certain point, but he's going to say some really fascinating stuff here that we're going to talk about, and it's going to kind of blow your mind. But let's watch this, and I'm going to make sure it's at 1.5. Because you can still hear it, I think.
Let's do 1.25 because sometimes people watch this faster and then that screws them up.
Okay, we'll do it 1.25. All right.
Whoa. Tough people. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Vince and I have had an amazing relationship for many years. Many, many years. And it all began with WrestleMania #4 in Atlantic City, where, frankly, I met the largest man I've ever seen to this date, the great Andre the Giant, who was great. My parents were there. They're no longer with us. My father said to me, this is one of the greatest things I've ever witnessed. It was an amazing evening. And I invited Vince back the next year. So we're the only ones. We had back-to-back WrestleManias, and it was really terrific. But it was a terrific time. But the thing that I guess we're known for is the battle of the billionaires. And to this date, it has the highest ratings, the highest pay-per-view in the history of wrestling of any kind. So, and I'm very honored by that, and perhaps that's why I'm being inducted. But I will say this. I will challenge Vince next year to a fight, and I will kick his ass if he wants. I will kick his ass. Now, Vince has been trying for the last 6 years to break our pay-per-view record. He's had some great people on, but you know what? It's not going to happen. And the same enthusiasm and love that you have for me tonight, I feel it. That's why you all came down to watch me get my ass kicked and my head shaved, but it didn't happen. So we're happy about that. Now, I have to introduce a few really great people. My son, Eric Trump. Stand up, Eric.
Listen to the booing. That's important.
My daughter, and a really big television star, she's become Ivanka. Hey, oh, good. Come here, Ivanka. Come here, Ivanka. Oh, finally, they like somebody in the Trump family. Well, this is Ivanka. We're very proud of Ivanka. And she does great on The Apprentice. Do we agree? Hey, good. Ivanka, you turned the tide. Thank you. And very importantly, I'm married to a great woman, Melania. Melania, stand up. So I have to just, in concluding, say this is a major honor. I've been honored by having the #1 show on television. I've been honored by having many #1 bestsellers. True. And I recently got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And I consider this to be my greatest honor of all. I do.
There you go.
I really do.
Yep. And he'll mention Linda here. We'll cut it off.
For Vince and Linda and the whole family, I just want to thank you all. And I really do love you people, even the ones that don't like me so much. Have a good time. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
So Linda McMahon, obviously, is the Secretary of Education now. She ran the Small Business Administration during the first Trump term. She was a major figure, apparently, in the campaign. She also was the president of WWE this entire time. That event right there happened at this Madison Square Garden. The very next night, Trump made his 5th appearance at WrestleMania. Like for the 5th time he was at WrestleMania. Everyone was there for the one reason. There was only one reason that event happened that night. That was for his induction into the Hall of Fame. So he's sitting there. It's like you have all these celebrities on the floor, and then you have like the fans up there, like in the in the peanut gallery up there, and they're all booing at him as he's sitting there going in and out of being the heel, just like Hulk Hogan at the Republican National Committee was going in and out of his character. He was like, I'm going to give you a little taste of Hulk Hogan, but really my real name is Terry Bollea, and I've known Donald Trump since the 1980s, and I love him very much. He's a good friend, but here's Hulk Hogan again, and he rips his shirt off. And it's like he's showing you what it is to go in and out of character. Now, let's go in and talk about, and then, of course, this is 2013, so the world doesn't really know about, well, they're getting acquainted with Ivanka and Eric and the whole Trump family. Yeah. Now we all know who these people are. But back then, it's like they were emerging characters in the brand. Trump talks
auspicious.
Yeah. So Trump's like, he's building this brand. He's bragging about how, like, he's becoming the most famous person in the world. He's getting
Which one is that? He's the biggest story at that time. He's bragging to everybody about being like, hey, you disliking me and booing me is a feature. I am the biggest character in the American zeitgeist right now.
Yeah. Did you watch wrestling like in the 90s, like when you were a kid?
When I was a little kid, I watched wrestling. And then when I got into martial arts, I went toward the UFC.
Yeah.
And I actually hated, I was one of those MMA fans that was like, I hated the WWE because I was like, the UFC is the real version of that. Now I've grown to appreciate all the storytelling. But I've got some stuff on the UFC that I've talked about on some shows. But, what did Trump also ingratiate himself to? The UFC audience, the UFC ownership. Because even though the UFC was quote unquote real fighting, where the WWE was pageantry, the promotion around the UFC, the reason the UFC, MMA was around in the 90s, but nobody knew about it. The reason that the UFC became a huge deal in the early 2000s after Zuffa LLC bought it, the Fertitta brothers, enemies of the New York State Culinary Union, by the way, perhaps longtime Trump allies. Dana White was their childhood friend, supposedly, who became the president. The UFC became a massive brand largely because they aped Vince McMahon and Vince McMahon's promotion style that he used for the WWE. But the reason it blew up even bigger than the WWE in the ensuing decade is because you had all the pageantry of the WWE, and then it would culminate in a real fight, right? It's like, nice. And that's what MMA used to sell itself on. It's just the fight. Well, that wasn't as popular as the fake fighting because why? The fake fighting had a better story. And that's a lot of what's going on here.
Yeah. Well, so I was like 9 years old at the time. Like this would have been 1998, like the late 90s. Mm-hmm. And they had what was called, it was like the golden era of professional wrestling. You had what was called the Monday Night Wars. So there was two different wrestling programs, two different wrestling leagues. I think they were both owned by Vince McMahon. Eventually they merged into one.
NWO and
that was like within one of them. I think it was the WWE. It was the WWF and the WCW. I think those were
right.
leagues.
I remember
and so they would have their program at the exact same time on Monday night. And so it was like you would get these crossovers between them, and there was like a rivalry, and there was like the whole thing. But there was enough of a market share for both of them to exist, and people got really, really into it. So the heel, like for people who didn't watch it, like part of the show was hating the heel. I mean, and what people who don't watch wrestling and didn't watch it back then don't understand is everyone knew the thing was fake. Like, it's not like people actually thought they were watching like real fighting. They knew the whole thing was fake, but there was still like an athleticism. Guys were still doing flips in the air and like cutting themselves, you know, to like make themselves bleed. And like, you know, just there was still a pageantry to it, but you would also boo the guys that you hated. And probably the most famous heel in the history of wrestling is probably The Rock. Dwayne The Rock Johnson. I think he probably became the most famous heel and obviously parlayed that into a real acting career. But he started out as like a villain, like a heel in WWE. And if we go back to what Trump said in that speech, by the way, he goes, my parents came to both the WrestleManias, WrestleMania 4 and 5, and they said it was the greatest thing they'd ever seen in their entire life, which is obviously like him. I mean, there's no way that's true, but he's just leaning into that. But I went and dug on what was happening and like within the storyline, within the narrative of WWE, what was happening. Because obviously we know what was happening at the casino. The FBI was there like gathering intel to run RICO cases on the mob, which eventually took down the Gambino crime family and all that stuff. And by the way, the gangsters, the mobsters that Trump was bringing in there, they were Ukrainian. So this all ties together. But within the narrative, here's what the narrative was. At WrestleMania 4, the big promotion was Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan. They didn't actually fight. It was the first WrestleMania that Hulk Hogan didn't fight at. He just was there as like a personality, but he didn't actually get in the ring. Yeah. At WrestleMania 3, the year before, Andre the Giant, remember, this is WrestleMania 3, so this is like the infancy of like the whole professional wrestling thing, like with the McMahons. I realized through like looking in all this, Hulk Hogan was like the protagonist of the whole thing. He was like written in as like the central character, and then you had all these other characters around him. He was the good guy. The bad guy up until WrestleMania 3 was Macho Man Randy Savage. He was like his rival. Another good guy, like his partner, was Andre the Giant. So at WrestleMania 3, what happens is the first instance of kayfabe where Andre the Giant becomes the bad guy and Randy Savage comes running in and saves his rival Hulk Hogan in a horseshoe theory moment. He becomes a good guy. And from there moving forward, Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage are like best friends. They're like allies. And Andre the Giant becomes the enemy, becomes the villain. And that's like the narrative then moving forward. And then eventually, like in the mid-90s, Hulk Hogan retires. He comes back as the bad guy. He comes back as a heel, revitalized his career. So that's where Trump, I think, learned about kayfabe. I think he understood that like you can reintroduce characters who were formerly bad guys as good guys. You can have good guys turn into bad guys turn into good guys, cross over. And this whole narrative kayfabe thing, that was the first real instance of kayfabe where you had the main good guy, Andre the Giant, turn bad, and the main bad guy turn good. And I didn't know that. Like, I had no idea. Like, I wasn't that into wrestling where I like knew all the history.
Right.
By the way, we'll do a full dive on that in the future. Just stand by for that. Because Abs is like a huge wrestling fan. He knows all this stuff. And it's actually kind of, he was telling me about it. It's actually fascinating how much this actually ties into the information war. But Trump learned that stuff while he was running the casino where the FBI was coming in and catching the Ukrainian mob that he was pretending to be best friends with. The left has written all these books about how Trump and Putin must be like in bed together because Trump had the Russian/Ukrainian mob in his casino as his friends, as his personal guests in the 80s. But actually he was working against them to have them arrested by the FBI, which is what you and Kyle talked about, because he's Bruce Wayne.
Well, and when you bring up Putin, I mean, that is ultimately, we can start at the ending. One of the first things I wrote on my Substack in the Righteous Russia series was the theory of the peacemakers. And it wasn't because of the WWE, but everything you point out here with WWE storytelling, the WWE didn't make up these concepts. You know, they didn't make up, I mean, the word kayfabe does come from World Wrestling, but these are storytelling devices that are ubiquitous in Western literature or Eastern literature as well. You know, it's not heel turns and face turns became the lingo from modern wrestling in the 80s and 90s, but these were just storytelling motifs that have been in literature for a long, long time. You know, you've always had rivals. You mentioned early in the show, protagonists need antagonists, right? Stories are powered by protagonists and they're defined by antagonists. They're also defined by foils, and foil characters don't always have to be antagonists. A lot of times they're rivals to the protagonist. And one of the most satisfying story archetypes has always been when a villain or antagonist or foil goes full circle and ends up helping the ally. It's one of the reasons, I bring up Lord of the Rings every chance I get. One of the reasons that the scene of Boromir's death in the Fellowship of the Ring is so satisfying to viewers is not just because it's like, oh, here's these two guys, these two men of Gondor, and they're having this incredible moment. It's Boromir and Aragorn have built up this rivalry throughout the story. And then in that moment, that rivalry culminates in them coming together on the same side, unifying. So I think the brilliance of WWE storytelling and why it was so influential is it was a testing ground for not just storytelling, but live storytelling and storytelling with the engagement and participation of the audience. So this is one of the things that a lot of wrestling people miss, is that WWE is scripted, but there are countless examples of when they change the script due to audience feedback. So there's another term, despite being somebody who doesn't really like WWE, I know a lot about it through my UFC history. Call sign Cujo trying to mansplain to me about the UFC, brother. I'm not the guy. But what have you ever heard of the term from World Wrestling called X-Pac heat?
Yeah, is that based on the character X-Pac?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I haven't heard the term, but I'm familiar with the guy. X-Pac. Yeah.
So what's interesting about X-Pac heat is X-Pac heat is a term that refers to when kayfabe goes wrong. So the storyline you pointed out is Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, and it's the most successful early version of kayfabe that we saw, right? Audiences ate it up. They ate up the rivalry. Then they eat up the unification, and it turns into this. It makes them all bigger stars. There was this guy, I believe it was the late 90s, X-Pac, who WWE tried to make him into the next heel. He was supposed to be the big villain that came into the shows. And audiences were booing X-Pac. And so Vince and the WWE, they were like, oh, we got it, right? This is what we want. We want the audience booing the villain. But what they didn't understand is that the audience was booing him because they didn't want him to be the villain, because they thought he was so lame. So they were booing the WWE, not the villain.
Yeah.
And then people stopped buying tickets. So this is kind of a cautionary tale. And then I guess the WWE learned from their mistakes, and we got into the Brock Lesnar era, where Brock Lesnar was a big heel. And then, funny enough, Brock Lesnar ends up joining the UFC, kind of puts those two fan bases against each other, where I remember being a UFC fan and they were all mad at WWE fans when Brock Lesnar joined the UFC, because it was crossing the barrier that you're not from fake to real. And it made all MMA fans really insecure. What if this fake wrestler starts winning real fights? But the X-Pac era is an example of ratings were going down, and it's because the audience knows that he's the villain, but they think he's a stupid villain. Mm-hmm. So they were like, guys, yeah, we get it, Vince. X-Pac is supposed to be the bad guy. He's fucking annoying. We don't want this story anymore. Go to a different story. And what the WWE realized, what Vince realized, is, oh, wait, we have full control over this product, so we can pivot the story. And they did. They pivoted away from X-Pac. They took the heat off of X-Pac, which is why they call it X-Pac heat. And they went to new villains, new stories, new heels, new faces. And I think what's so what's so signal about that, besides what you're talking about with the Atlantic City Casino and the plan and all this kind of stuff, when a lot of us talk about narrative control in the info war, it's more like the WWE. It doesn't, like, they have a script, but if the audience isn't responding to that script, they've got a B plot and a C plot and a D plot that they can jump to that are different rails. And I guarantee you that Trump was, to your point, he was workshopping all this stuff in the WWE. And then in the info war, I think that's what they do. They test these stories out and they're like, what are we getting? What are we getting out of MAGA? Is this Randy Savage heat that we want? Yeah. Or is this X-Pac heat that we don't want? And that means people are disengaging from the story.
Yep.
So I think, there's a lot of signal to the WWE days. And, another thing you talk about in the news brief a lot is the templates assigned to other characters, right? Like part of what made the WWE work at its peak in the UFC at its height was all these different fighters and different characters with unique stories. And it's like, lo and behold, we've got that right now where you've got Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin and Mohammed bin Salman, Kim Jong-un. Like you've got all these larger than life caricatures that are also the leaders of powerful sovereign nations.
Yeah. I mean, Kim Jong-un is like probably my favorite guy in the whole thing, because he is a WWE character in my opinion. I mean,
totally.
And like to the extent of like the clothes he wears and like the stuff he says, he's such a goofball that he seems actually pretty endearing. And then I mean, Dennis Rodman being from the Celebrity Apprentice to going to being the diplomat that actually brings Kim Jong-un into the fold. I mean, it's amazing script writing. And to your point, I mean, it's all about keeping audiences engaged. And for a long time, I have spent a lot of time wondering and thinking about, why are guys like Lindsey Graham allowed to hang around? Like, why did Trump keep Lindsey Graham around? Like, why wasn't he driven out of Congress the way that Paul Ryan was driven out of Congress in 2018? And I think the reason is because you got to keep some heels around in order to keep some villains out there to keep the audience engaged. And I mean, Trump just put a meme out the other day of the drones bringing McDonald's to Chris Christie. I mean, Chris Christie is the guy who put Jared Kushner's father in prison in 2005, like as a prosecutor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's no way Trump actually likes Chris Christie. Like, Trump hates Chris Christie, but he keeps him around so he can make memes about him being fat and definitely not a fat pig. And just rail on him whenever he wants. But if
I think he was using Jeb Bush as X-Pac. He was telling when he called him low energy Jeb Bush, he was like, he ended his career, and he ended his role in the narrative because he wasn't casting him as a villain. He was casting him as irrelevant.
Yeah.
And right, like that's one of the age-old things in combat sports and in WWE. If you are being hated is good if you're hated by the audience. If the audience doesn't care about you, it's very, very, very bad. And that means you're going to have a really short career. Even in MMA, if you're winning fights, the second you lose a fight, the UFC is going to boot you to the curb if you have no fans. Mm-hmm. Which is why you see characters like Conor McGregor, who's a real fighter, but also has a character that he plays. Because when a real fighter like that loses, if the character is valuable, he remains valuable to keep booking him in fights. Where if a boring fighter loses, he's expendable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. By the way, Hulk Hogan, when he came back, because he had kind of exhausted the good guy role, he retired. He tried to do an acting career for a year. It didn't work out. So he comes back. And he starts a stable called the NWO, the New World Order, where his whole thing is all right, I'm going to bring all the villains, all the heels, the major heels from the program together, and we're going to form a super group of bad guys, and we're going to call it the New World Order. And it's he's leaning into that narrative because obviously the conspiracy theories were out there. So it's that there's just a lot of that kind of stuff that happens with the script writing, where it's very tongue in cheek, but it's also, it understands the zeitgeist and understands the culture and speaks directly to it.
Yeah, absolutely. The one of the words that comes to mind with the TrumpaMania topic is templates, and you just mentioned the NWO. But think of sort of InfoWar templates that Donald Trump has seeded into the public narrative, such as the deep state. Trump didn't make up the term deep state, but he absolutely injected it into the public consciousness. Deep state, fake news media. Like, what's he doing? He's branding the enemy. That's what he is. And what's a brand? A brand is a story, and it sticks. That's what branding is all about. So again, that's where like you can have these fighters or these athletes who could be talented, but if they don't have a brand, if they don't have a story, they're going to fade into irrelevance. And I think Donald Trump recognized that when it came to American politicians. Why are the American people not engaged in American politics? Well, first of all, it depresses them. Second of all, they don't trust any of these politicians. And third, and probably honestly most relevant, they don't fucking care because politics was boring. Exactly.
It's boring.
And so to your point about TrumpaMania, step one of Donald Trump getting the public mandate for us to save ourselves, not for him to save us, is provoking the American engagement into the political realm. He made politics WrestleMania.
Yep.
And I know you've got you mentioned Dennis Rodman, like there's some other connections there, but man, in the news brief, like it's so funny, the Kim Jong-un stuff and with Vladimir Putin, like it does feel like the sillier and the more Trumpamania things get, the closer we're getting towards some inflection points.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many stories out there, which there's so many different ways to talk about. Like Kanye West would be one. Where Kanye West comes out 2 weeks after Trump wins the 2020 election, stops a concert like 3 songs in and says, he starts railing on Hillary Clinton and Jay-Z and Beyonce and Barack Obama and threatening them, saying it's a new world. Like, you better watch out. And then he says, Jay-Z, I know you have hired killers. Please don't send them to kill me. Just call me. We can talk. And it's like, wait, what? And then, of course, the next day he gets institutionalized by this Harley Pasternak character. And then 3 weeks later ends up in Trump Tower looking like he just left the mental institution, like he's been through hell. And Trump has his arm around him, and Trump says, Kanye, we're going to take care of him. Kanye is okay. We're gonna make sure Kanye's a good guy. I've known him for a long time. We're going to take care of him. And what happens? Kanye then goes into like having this Christian revival thing where he says, I'm going to make Christianity cool for young people. He releases a gospel album called Jesus is King. He does like the karaoke thing on the CBS late night where they're on the plane with the whole gospel choir singing gospel songs. I mean, it's like he's the only person who was cool enough to make Christianity appealing to young people, like to that extent. And he really did accomplish that, it feels like. Now it seems like there's been some setbacks or maybe some MK Ultra stuff, but I don't think his story's over. I think we might see he went from hero to heel, and now I think he might return as like with Trump coming back into office. We might see Kanye come back and make the turn again into hero and do like the Jesus. And if that happens, then that it's like this is Trumpamania.
Work. Another interesting point on the Kanye thing, to the point of making Christianity cool and everything. To further your point there, one of the terms I use most often, or actually one of the strategies I use most often when trying to figure out which direction to go in the info war, is reverse indicators. I tend to use negative signal more often than active or positive signal. I just find that, you can look at what the enemy fears the most by what they're attacking, more so sometimes than the direction your chosen leaders are trying to point you in. I just find that the enemy tends to be more honest, ironically, about what they fear because they're reacting. So to your point about Kanye's base, which, let's just be blunt, was a lot of American black people, right? Yep. Like, yeah, he was liked among a lot of millennials, but he was huge in the rap scene, the American hip hop scene, the hip hop scene in particular. Brilliant musician. A lot of people that kind of discount him, and I'm not even really into that kind of music as much, but I respect his writing and his scripting ability. His lyrics. But besides his lyrics, his musical arrangements, Kanye did most of his own musical arrangements, and there's some of the best, like in the history of hip hop. I think you've written about a lot of the most famous people in hip hop in the 90s and early 2000s. Kanye was the one writing their music and arranging their music that made them really famous. And then when he started coming out and getting like doing it himself, Thanos style, he drew, even before the Donald Trump InfoWars stuff, he was drawing a lot of shrapnel from a lot of those guys because it turns out that they can't produce their own music. He was the one writing it all.
Yeah, so like he apparently was like he was the guy like in the early 2000s because his first album came out in 2004, and apparently before that for many years Jay-Z basically had him working as like an organ grinder monkey where the stars would come to Jay-Z and be like, "Hey, I need a hit song," and he'd be like, "All right, cool, I got a guy who can do that," and then Kanye would produce the music, you know, write the lyric, or somebody would write the lyrics or whatever, and then they put it all together, they'd hand it to somebody else, they would get the song. And Kanye would maybe get some sort of like obscure credit, but nobody really knew who he was. And he kept trying to like do his own thing, and Jay-Z wouldn't let him. Jay-Z was like, no. Like, you're my guy. I'm not sharing you with the world. Like, you're mine. And that caused apparently a lot of animosity between him and Kanye, which then fomented, like boiled over after Trump won the election and led him to basically be like, throw the middle finger up and be like, Jay-Z, I hate you. But yeah, so he was like a literal musical genius and was just known for that. His first album, by the way, in 2004, he had a song on it called Jesus Walks, where he talks about in the song how the music industry is run by Satanists. And basically, if you're a black rapper, you're forced to talk about the most degenerate stuff. And if you ever talk about God, they will never play your record and they will destroy you.
Well, and that's the point I was going to get to, is exactly that. The reverse signal, the signal that is a negative indicator, was when his audience started actually buying into his Christian messaging was when the machine attacked him, right? Mm-hmm. Because when he's coming out and going like from black hip hop artist, money and whatever, to Christian revivalist, his audience largely saw it as one of two things: a breakdown, some sort of mental bizarre breakdown, or a rebranding attempt, and a branding attempt that they didn't like. They didn't see it as authentic, right? And you can't really blame them. Like when he fills a plane full of gospel singers, they're like, is this real? Does he really believe these things? Or is this some kind of like strange rebranding attempt by Kanye? When the machine, to your point, attacked him specifically because he was espousing Christian virtue and going against the debauchery of the hip hop scene, that's when his audience started to understand this is what they actually find threatening about Kanye. It's that he believes this stuff, right? So this is the irony sometimes where the media machine helps enforce the messaging of the person that they're attacking, because then the audience knows it's real. It's worth playing this quick clip. This is one of the infamous, if anybody's forgotten this, what year was this? So
this is the clip I was talking about. This is literally December of 2016. This is 1 month after Trump lost the election. And so what happens is December 19th, I think it was, there was a concert in Sacramento. That's where he stopped the concert, went on like a 40-minute rant about how much, basically like a big middle finger to Hillary and Obama and Jay-Z, and then into the concert, walked off. It was like a worldwide news that Kanye was having a mental breakdown, got sent off to a mental institution for like 10 days. And then basically, from what I can tell, it looks like Trump kind of saved him from this mental institution, brings him to Trump Tower. Look at what Kanye's like friends, like the way they interact with Trump. That's the hell.
Mr. Trump, Kanye, what did you guys discuss in your meeting today?
Just friends, and he's a good man. He's doing well. Long time. We've been friends for a long time. Life. We discussed it.
Money in 2020. Do you think that's something you still want to do in light of this meeting? Kanye, are you considering performing at the inauguration? Kanye, no comment about your meeting with the president-elect. This is the president-elect of the United States. Nothing to say?
I just want to take a picture right now.
Do you wish you were voting for him, Kanye?
You take care of yourself. I'll see you soon. All right?
Yeah, so just as a little bit of, I mean, this is conspiracy theory, but hey, we're on Badlands. When you guys see terms or headlines pop up, one of the key terms, speaking of language coding, that you should look for in Hollywood tabloids or any of that kind of stuff is the word rehab. When the word rehab comes up, it almost always signals that this person has been forced into drug-induced reprogramming. And that sounds crazy until you look at a clip like that, which you can see. I mean, I'm somebody who's been around people with drug issues my whole life. I'm very familiar with it. You know it when you see it. Kanye is not in his, like, he is somebody who is coming out of something. He's barely there. He looks unstable. And that is because he was being forcibly medicated. A lot of this stuff is documented by a psycho who is known in Hollywood, and these are these handlers. So often these very famous celebrities, they have handlers in the form of agents, and a lot of the handlers now are health gurus, people like that, like the fitness instructors and the vitamin supplements and whoever these people are. Some of these people, these entertainers, end up signing contracts sort of unbeknownst to themselves, where they literally give power of attorney to like their fucking gym instructor or their nutritionist, and they don't really understand what's going on. I mean, somebody that might come to mind for people is Britney Spears, who quite infamously does not have, apparently, did not have legal authority over her own medical decisions, so that her family and her management could put her into rehab. They could put her on medications. They could take her off medications. They could restrict her freedom of movement. I mean, talk about slavery. That's what goes on here. And, you know, the stuff you've pointed out about that clip is, you know, that looks like Trump being involved with getting him out of a situation that he was put in.
Yeah, well, and so the guy you're talking about, his name is Harley Pasternak, and he is Matt Arrett actually knows a lot about him because he is former Canadian intelligence, and what he's known for. This is like a understood fact. This is not like conspiracy theory. When he was in Canadian intelligence, his specialty was experimental psychotropic drugs. That was what he was known for. And now he is as you said, he is a professional trainer in Hollywood, and all of his clients are the top rated, like class A, top tier celebrities. They all belong to him, and he's known for like texting them and being like, whoa, you're not supposed to say that, and basically controlling them. And then according to Kanye came out and said later that Harley was injecting with lithium. Lithium is like a known like mind control substance. And so this is not, I mean, some of it's conjecture and conspiracy theory, but a lot of it's based on...
These are claims that have been made. At the very least, they're claims that have been made by these people. We can say that. Like, these aren't just claims that internet conspiracy theorists have made about what was going on with these people. These are claims that Kanye has made and other victims have made. The Britney stuff came out in court because she sued to get control of her own life back, which is when it then came out that she literally, a group, there was a board of directors that had power of attorney over Britney Spears. And from the time she was a very young girl, which is the very, very dangerous dark side of mental health in the mental health industry, is they've got legal authority if they can get you to sign certain documents, where they can basically take your human rights, right? They can take your sovereignty. They can treat you like you're a 5-year-old.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. If you go to share my screen real quick. So from that meeting, he walks out and he said for 12 months, I went and looked, for 12 months after that like little clip right there, he's MIA. He's nowhere to be found. And apparently what happens is he goes into hiding. He spends time with his family. Him and Kim Kardashian was his wife, who had probably his handler. His handler. She gets pregnant again. They have another kid. He reemerges a year later, like in late 2017. And then eventually, like a year after that, or sometime in 2018, he has this moment where him and Jim Brown, the famous NFL running back, they go to the White House and Kanye is like a totally different person. He's giddy. He's like a giddy little boy talking about how much he loves Trump, and Trump's like his superhero. And when he puts on the MAGA hat, he becomes a superhero. He famously goes on Saturday Night Live and performs with a MAGA hat on, and later talks about the abuse he suffered for doing that. I mean, all of this is signal. And then, of course,
he called the left a hate movement.
yeah, he calls the left a hate movement. Exactly. He then last December and November, I talked about this on Liberty Den with John and Jay Trip. He was in Saudi Arabia at a very, very posh, like high profile resort that was built by MBS. It was like MBS's personal resort that he built. And it turns out that while he was there, MBS was like 2 miles away doing like his winter camp, like his Bedouin style winter camp with his tent and everything. And like Lindsey Graham and all these famous people from around the world are coming to this tent to meet with MBS. And 2 miles away, Kanye is spending his whole winter at this resort recording an album. And the album, of course, is called Vultures, and it has like the Habsburg, like Rothschild eagle, like double-headed eagle as the logo. And then there's famously, he leaves that resort, he goes to the UAE to a hotel, and then there's a video that goes viral of Harley Pasternak showing up at this hotel, demanding to like, what's Kanye's room number? I need to see Kanye West right now. And then Kanye, of course, disappears, reemerges months later. And he looks like a different person. He looks like he's back on the drugs. He's talking about degeneracy. He's talking about like becoming a porn magnet, like becoming like a porn industry guy. And it seems like he's turned back into the heel, which is where he is right now. So again, like, and Harley Pasternak was at the center of all that. So, you know, these are all rabbit holes that we'll go down in the future on another show. But it's,
we could do full shows on them. But
fascinating stuff though.
Yeah, and you know, just to touch on again, the whole idea here is just these characters that are around Trump, that have been around Trump for a long time. Here's Dennis Rodman sporting
oh my
NWO
God. With Hulk Hogan.
with I don't know if you had ever seen this, but
no, I haven't. Yeah. That's fantastic.
Yeah, Rodman joined the NWO.
Oh my gosh, that's too perfect.
Yeah, so I figured you knew that when you brought him up with The Apprentice. So yeah, and then you know, I guess we'll start wrapping up this topic. Ghost will be doing a lot on this topic in 2025. If you guys would like to subject yourself to that, would you like to say anything about that? I know you don't necessarily have a name locked down, but this is the general direction.
No, we don't have a name locked down. It will basically be TrumpaMania. If you read the news brief, you will be very familiar with the tone and the style and the content. It's basically going to be geopolitics. It's going to be like the stuff that we were just talking about, the celebrity cultural stuff. It's going to be basically the first draft of history that we are witnessing right now, with Donald Trump as the vehicle, where every episode we will I'll bring in, just like you have on this program, like a different co-host. It'll be a different like granular level topic. Maybe it'll be like a specific event or a person, or like a connection between Trump and something. A lot of it's going to be about Trump's first term as president. I mean, there's so much stuff there, like stuff that was happening in the background, like geopolitically, that never gets talked about. That is just pure signal. But we're also going to go deeper into like Trump's history, like going back to the 1980s, going back to the 1990s, talking about how a lot of this stuff is going to like connected. By the way, Mark Burnett, it was just announced this afternoon that Mark Burnett, who's the producer of The Apprentice, the producer of The Celebrity Apprentice, was just appointed to be in the Trump administration as the special envoy.
I was gonna show that.
Special envoy to Britain. So I'll definitely do an episode where, you know, Patrick was a huge Celebrity Apprentice fan, so he has always said he wants to do a show about that. So I'm gonna bring Patrick on, and we're gonna go deep into the Celebrity Apprentice and like all the people who were on that show who are now like part of this whole Trump story. So it's going to be a lot of fun. The word that I would use to describe it is whimsical. It's going to be like the first thing is I want it to be fun and engaging and entertaining, but I also want it to be informative, because we're going to talk about geopolitics. We're going to talk about like the celebrity cultural stuff. But it's going to be like a documentation of history.
Yeah, I think, you know, and Ghost had talked to me about this, and John and different people just about kind of nailing down what he wants to do. And of course, as I've been doing with this show, it'll evolve naturally. The way I've started to think about because originally I was kind of like, well, this is sort of what we do anyway on a lot of the shows. But as you really started talking about it, I think the way that I frame it is a lot of what we do in the info war, the reason we call it an info war, is we are, by the nature of it being an info war, we are deconstructing narratives.
Yes.
We are engaging narratives on the battlefield. Some of those are good narratives from our side. Some of them are opposing narratives, but we're sort of observing the clash of narratives. We're deconstructing them because it's like disarming bombs, right? There's a reason I use the term deployment with narratives. I always say narrative deployments. I've been saying that for 3-4 years in my writing because I think of them as war deployments. They are deployments that have the capacity to change reality if these narratives are not disarmed. So a lot of what we do is deconstruction. And what you're going to be doing, specifically using Trump, is an attempt at construction, at narrative construction. And I think that's great. That's what, a lot of people have asked before, like, oh, what happens when we win? And first of all, there's no such thing, right? It's a process. But I kind of get, generally, they're talking about, let's say Trump gets back in office, everything turns around and is really going well. That's when we all get to shift more toward what Ghost is going to be talking about on this show. You're going to be doing the Trump theater and what spins out from that. But I think we're going to move to an era of narrative construction and societal construction. Right now, we're in a needed deconstruction phase. But this will be it's a great place to start with narrative construction is, what do we think? And that's the caveat, right? What do we think is the true story of Donald Trump over the last 20, 30 years? And that's going to be really fun to follow.
That is exactly right. You absolutely nailed it. This is power projection. This is like our own projection of what we think. Because like I said at the very beginning of this discussion, all history is interpretation. And as my Russian history professor used to say, who was extremely based, in this classroom, my interpretation is right. Wink. And it's like, so this is going to be my interpretation or our interpretation with my co-hosts of what we think happened, of like what the story is. And it's a first draft of history. And then it'll be, does it hold up over time? And like we'll find out. But this is our chance now to do power projection and to assert what we think the truth is, or what our best understanding of events. And history is always a process. It's not something that's static, that is written in stone. The more information that comes out, you go back and you revise your thesis and you add to it and you build it out. You change narratives and shift things. And this is going to be the first attempt, so we'll see what happens. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I look forward to like all the different places we can take it and how we can weave the more mainstream celebrity zeitgeist in with geopolitics and make it all sexy.
Yeah, it's going to be great to watch, and I'm sure I will be invited to be on an episode when we do.
Storytelling's your thing, brother.
Vlad, the ultimate pincer move. We didn't really get into it tonight because it'll be its own show. Maybe it'll be a show on your show. The ultimate heel face turn, as you teased earlier, that has been seeded from the very beginning of the current war of stories is Donald Trump versus Vladimir Putin. Except it's actually Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man Randy Savage. And they're going to take down the NWO, brother. That's what's going to happen. They're going to take down the NWO. Mark it. We've been telling you this for years. And yeah, Ghost teased it. But just in case you guys sometimes get roped into thinking that things are real, Trump gives you these little signals, such as picking a Celebrity Apprentice person to be his UK envoy. Now, again, doesn't mean it's fake. It just means this has all been connected. It's all been a storytelling op. And, I hope people are getting to the point, and I think they are, where they understand that when we're calling things stories, we're not calling them unimportant. Quite the opposite. We are saying that the reason Trump and company are using storytelling is because they know that that's the way to undo a centuries-long death cult that's been using the same thing to control us.
Yes, storytelling is the ultimate weapon. It is more powerful than any nuclear bomb. It's more powerful than any kinetic weapon you can have, because, like they say in V for Vendetta, ideas are bulletproof. You can't destroy an idea. You can't shoot an idea and bomb it out of existence, because it will persevere through other people. So that's what makes storytelling so important, because storytelling is how we build culture. It's how we build common bonds. It's how we steer societies in certain directions. And it's also how we recount our history. We inspire kids to grow up and become something better than what their parents were. It's everything. And so now we have to weaponize it against the people who have weaponized it against us.
Absolutely. And to use that and come full circle onto the first topic we discussed tonight, which was how Trump navigated the continuing resolution in Congress. If you ever find yourself kind of spinning in the chaos a little bit of the info war and kind of going, man, what does Trump actually want here? I don't pretend to have that answer, right? I've got my theories. What did Trump really want to happen with the continuing resolution? I lean toward that whatever happened was what he wanted to happen. Some people think that's a cop-out, right? But if you find yourself spinning in the void and going, man, I see some headlines saying that Trump wants the resolution to pass. I see some saying the opposite. I see Trump saying A and then B. I see the media lambasting him for doing both of these things. Back up a little bit. And as you just said, ideas can't be killed. One of the things I say in my writing is, he who wins the story wins the war. To win the story, you have to be present in the story. And what all the continuing resolution narrative bullshit had in common over the last several days is that Donald Trump was front and center in every social media post, every headline, every talking point for the last week. Just as a hint, that is not the guy who's losing the narrative. So, when you're ever at a loss, if Trump's name is plastered across your feed, he's probably right where he wants to be in the narrative.
Yes, exactly. And like you said before, and the Mark Burnett deployment really nails it. This has all been a television production. Your entire reality for the past 100 years has been a television production. Trump has just taken over as the executive producer and made it a wrestling pageant, basically, and just cranked up the absurdity so that everyone becomes aware that their reality is actually a contrived fake pageant, and we need to wake up from it so we can retake control of our lives.
Damn straight. All right, I will grab rants from the audience, and then we can get out of here.
People are asking when the show is going to start. I'm targeting like the first week of January, hopefully. More information to come, but I already have like the first 5 episodes lined up, I think, with like guests, so or at least outlined. So I think we'll hit the ground running, and we'll have a good thing going.
I think we should try to promote it to the fake news media so that they can call it fake news.
Oh, that's such a good idea.
We can have full fake news inversion where they're calling. We'll just start creating our own fake news.
Fake news inception, yeah.
You can present it as satire, and that way everybody knows that you're not presenting it as satire, but you can pretend it's being presented as satire.
I love that idea.
Tom Terrific 54 sent $70 over. December 24th is my birthday. Here's $1 for each orbit I've made around the sun. Well, okay, Glober. First of all, Tom, but thank you very much. Much appreciated. That's a birthday that's going to get you gypped. My mom's birthday was yesterday, and man, those Christmas babies, they really get the short end of the stick when it comes to presents. But thank you very much.
Happy birthday, Tom, and thank you for the rant. And awesome, man. Cheers to you.
Melindy requesting an outro and similar type to the intro to include some Jon Snow, Tyrion, etc., and more Lord of the Rings. Tyrion's an okay character. I'm gonna be honest. I'm a bit of a Jon Snow hater. Not into the character. Don't think he's compelling. He's kind of a Mary Sue, and that's not the archetype I tend to like.
What's a Mary Sue?
Well, a Mary Sue is basically, think of Rey Skywalker in the new movies.
Okay.
It's a it's a character that there's no growth pattern. Everything is easy. Their personality in frame 1 of the movie is the same as in the last frame. And the male version of it would be a Gary Stu character where like just nothing changes with them. They don't evolve in any way. And now that's a little unfair with Jon Snow, but in a world full of nuanced characters that grow and change, he just sort of he doesn't. I don't know. I just feel like he does stupid things in episode 1, and he does stupid things like all through. But
it's a fair analysis. But I will say this: he does do horseshoe theory, and that's the one thing I do appreciate of him is he does the horseshoe theory with bringing the wildlings in.
Yeah.
So
I see Jon Snow as a very effective plot device more so than a character. Like I don't find his character compelling, but his plot arc is good.
Tyrion also has a great line where he says, "We don't make peace with our friends; we make peace with our enemies."
Absolutely. As I said in the Righteous Russia series, you can't have peace without the threat of war. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin understand that. Mima Hunter, $17. What a wonderful gift to have BB and Gordon together for this show. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas
to you. By the way, guys, if you like this matchup and if you'd like a peppering of Chris Paul thrown in, watch Christmas Eve. There will be a story hour. It will be us two and Chris. We already recorded it. It was a great episode, I think. But I'll be in chat screwing around with you guys. Christmas Eve episode, we did a version of this conversation about Home Alone and the game theory in that movie, and rabbit trailed into a lot of the stuff we rabbit trailed tonight. But that's a good one.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
So yeah, watch Story Hour on Christmas Eve. What do we got here? Micro Toolmaker, $117. Thank you very much. Sent one of those over the other day too. Merry Christmas, BB and Ghost. I'm loving this new show. It really feels like the right show coming at the right time. Where we go one, we go all.
Totally agree.
Much appreciated, Micro. Cynthia67, if you haven't read Eric Carlson's Substack about Generation X, it explains a lot about our current thinking. Yep. Again, guys, the Badlands Substack is free. Check it out. Go to badlands.substack.com. You can support us there financially if you want to, but you don't have to. Eric Carlson with the Generation X. Gen Xers do have a little bit of the small dog syndrome, I will say, but they're fine. Data 12. When I was in Iraq, I was not sure who the people were when they said, I follow John the Baptist. It throws me today. I honestly don't know what they were telling me.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, John the Baptist, his story is that he basically was Jesus' cousin who went out ahead. Like he knew Jesus was coming. He knew Jesus was going to be the Messiah. So he went out ahead and paved the way and prepared the way for Jesus to come through. And basically was like, he's presented in The Chosen, which is a great series for people who aren't familiar with the Bible, as kind of like the raving, like conspiracy theorist, archetype, but very compelling character.
Damn straight. Patrick J17, what would you be if you were not Irish? A shame. That's true. I think about that every moment of every day.
Amen.
Another 179. Thank you, BB and Ghost. Thank you. You know, Freud said the Irish were the only people impervious to psychoanalysis, and you people are lucky that we are, because if we're impervious to psychoanalysis, it means we're impervious to brainwashing. So, also, little known fact, you know, the highest personality trait associated with success in life is disagreeableness. That's true. Everyone's going to look that up after the stream. The most disagreeable doesn't mean dickheads. It just means people who are willing to disagree with people in positions of authority have the most successful lives.
Interesting.
And highest degree of happiness. So
I love that.
Get a little more Irish in you, and things will turn around for you. I'm sure of it. Seastrich, $20. Thanks, fellas, for a great late night conversation. There was no way it wasn't going to be. I feel like we just did our intro.
Yeah. I mean,
24 in.
I was in the chat earlier saying that the longest, the record for the longest Senate filibuster was 24 hours, and I think we're going to try to break it.
Oh man!
Yeah.
If they ever need Patriots, if anybody watches this show, if you guys ever need some filibustering, we'll just start streaming.
Yeah.
Get you some ratings. Leonce, thanks for the masterclass in Middle Eastern geopolitics. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also think going forward, all Middle Easterners should once more be played by white British men. the only thing you still look at with some of those, and you're like, okay,
all right.
Add it up. $10. Love the show and the rotating guest host. Where we go when we go all. Thank you very much. Cam Cooksey, he's getting a little big for his britches. Cam, Burning Bright, Ghost, great show tonight. Next time, let's make it 4 hours. Mewy Christmas, Mike Tyson voice. I was supposed to say that in the Mike Tyson voice, but I'd rather read it as if I'm AI, and I think it's funnier. The Meerkat, $20. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish Q a Merry Christmas. We wish Badlanders a Merry Christmas and a happy Q year. Thanks, BB and Ghost. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meerkats are rascally little fellas and quite entertaining. Call sign Cujo, BB and Ghost. Thank you. Merry Christmas. God bless. Don't ever fight me. Just saying, low. Cujo, my God, I've known many a guy like you, Cujo.
Cujo and I have had all like off-screen conversations, so I will not try to fight him, and for very good reason.
Yeah, just saying. People think I'm joking about having been the #1 ranked kickboxer in the Northeast United States, which I was. So I've heard all the stories of a dude who fought in pit fights and blah blah blah. Show me your sanctioned record, Cujo. Show me it. Melindy says, "Okay, BB. How about Mance Raider then?" Well, book Mance Raider is really cool. Show Mance Raider sucks. Or Sansa. Sansa's lame in both.
Yeah. Mance was pretty good. I mean, he was probably the most based. Like he understood like what was happening, and defected from the whole system and went and became the king of the wildlings and tried to lead the revolt. But yeah.
Yeah, part of call sign Cujo. Ghost, please have BB contact me soon. Would love to speak to him. You're contacting me right now, Cujo. I like you. I'm not in like with you. Yeah, I part of my copium of Game of Thrones season 8 is that I've talked to Abs about this, that I really think that we've been going through a Patriot engineered demoralization campaign when it comes to popular media. I really believe that. And I think it might have started with Game of Thrones or accelerated with Game of Thrones. It was the highest rated genre show in American history. A lot of it because of its character arcs, etc. And if you had written an algorithm to invert every character arc into the least satisfying possible ending you could.
Yeah.
That is what the last season of that show does, to the point where the writer of the incomplete books will no longer even talk about it because it was so bad. And it's not one of these things where it's like butthurt, the character didn't go where you wanted it to. It's like the arcs in the books are not leading where the show led us. But man, that's a rough one. Like, that one's so bad that people will ask me who have never watched Game of Thrones, and I'm like, they're like, man, you used to say this was like the best show ever made. And I was like, oh, it was. And they're like, so wouldn't it be worth watching even if the ending is not good? And I tell them no, personally. I say, my opinion is the ending is so bad that it inverts everything you have spent your time on in the lead up to it.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, it was once they ran out of the book material. That's when it went off the rails, because it wasn't just how it ended. It was like how awful the writing was, and there was no dialogue, and they like the really interesting storylines they just like basically gave up on. And I didn't even hate the fact that Khaleesi like ended up turning heel, because
there was the way it happened.
Exactly, because it kind of had like a French Revolution thing to it, where it was like there was so much promise, and then all of a sudden it turned into something evil. That was the French Revolution. So like there's great lessons to kind of infuse into the story there. It just was so like awful the way it was executed.
Yeah. It was the way, it was the reason the characters made the choices they did. Like, the standout line for me, my favorite character in the books, just as a character arc, is Jaime Lannister. And he goes from his whole arc being about like discovering his humanity and having had humanity in him the whole time, like when he saved King's Landing. And then his dagger of a line in season 8 is, I never really cared about the people. And then he just goes back, which is just like the inverse of the entire point of the character arc.
Yep.
And it literally, if you read, this is what, like, my own family gets annoyed when I'm like, oh, this isn't the way it was supposed to go, because they'll tell me, well, who are you to say? Like, the writers decided that was the way it was. As a former writer, as a writer, I always look at the interviews of the people that are writing the shows or movies to see why they have made the choices they did. And man, some of those interviews with the writers of Game of Thrones Season 8 went viral in the normie internet for them admitting that they forgot about events of previous seasons. They never had a plan for X, Y, and Z character. They thought such and such turn would be cool and unexpected. And like that's why the decisions were being made. So it isn't like, oh, we actually had this plan the whole time. Like, they will tell you from their own mouth that they just thought it would be funny or something.
Yeah,
but anyway,
subverting expectations is the stupidest strategy when it comes to storytelling. Like, subverting expectations. Oh wow, like shock jock. Like, and by the way, there are people like in the influencer world who take that approach with like their hot takes. And
Absolutely,
it's like it's the same thing. It's just so contrived and cringe.
Demoralization, and besides Game of Thrones, we saw it with Star Wars. We saw it with Lord of the Rings right now. We see it with many IP. Lou Frano. $200. I hope that wasn't a mistake. If it was not a mistake, then thank you very much. Will y'all consider reviewing the movies Being There and Sleeper? Being There. That sounds familiar.
Wow. Thank you.
Make sure you didn't mean to send over like $2 or something first. Not that I'm complaining. Being There, 1979, American satirical comedy drama. Interesting. I will put this on the list to check out. A gardener who's resided in the D.C. townhouse of his wealthy employer for his entire life and has been educated only by television is forced to vacate his home when his boss dies.
Wow. Okay, that does sound really interesting.
That sounds really interesting. And then Sleeper. Let me look that one up. Sleeper, 1973. Chris has been telling me he's going to start hitting me with a lot of 70s movies because I've not seen a lot of 70s movies. And these are both 70s. Sleeper is after health store owner Miles Monroe dies during a routine surgery, his family has him cryogenically frozen. He awakens 200 years later, revived by a group of underground radicals who oppose the oppressive regime in power.
Whoa. Interesting. That sounds interesting too. Did you see that Netflix just came out last week with a movie about like a noble TSA agent? It was the guy from The Kingsman. Yeah, and the like thing that they were trying to take the airplane down with was Novichok, which is like the Russian Soviet era like chemical agent. That's like in the news now because of the guy that they assassinated. I mean, it's crazy how like that's all being seeded and they came out within like days of one another.
We've been telling people for a couple of years they keep watching the real fake news instead of the honest fake news, which is movies. And Story Hour is going to tell you probably more of what's actually going on than trying to figure out what's going on in the news. Anyway, thanks for joining, Ghost. Glad to have you here. We'll have you again. I'll probably just keep rotating through the peeps. What do you got going on this week? You're going to be on our Home Alone episode Tuesday night.
Yeah, no breaking history on Wednesday. I think we'll do Badlands Daily. As far as I know, we'll do Badlands Daily Tuesday morning. And then, just be ready for an announcement in early January. I'll come out with more details, but it'll be early January, and we'll get that thing kicked off, and it should be a lot of fun. And obviously, you'll be on one of the earlier episodes because we are going to talk about Putin. And I feel like
I didn't say I would accept the invitation. I said I expected an invitation.
But you also need to come back to talk about Dagestan and MMA.
Oh, yeah.
That's a rabbit hole. That's like its own episode, whereas like Putin is, So it's like there's going to be multiple episodes where you're probably going to need to.
The Nurmagomedov rabbit hole is deep and dark and full of terrors. All right, people. Thank you very much for watching. I want to shout out our two sponsors tonight, EasyRx. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/EasyRx, promo code Christmas. And then Right Wing Naturals, brand new sponsor. Thank you guys for sponsoring the show. Please support them, guys. When you support them, it shows them that it's worth supporting us. RightWingNaturals.com, promo code Badlands. get you some soap if your man stinks. And otherwise, I will see you guys on this show in 2 weeks is the plan. No show next weekend. Should be one in a couple weeks. Go ahead.
Parting thing, I meant to say this because this is a storytelling show. If I were writing the script of this, like what we're actually living through right now, because we all talk about like who's the Fed at Badlands, I would definitely write in that G Money was the forced PSYOP group, like operative. And the reason they sent him was because he was the least toxic of the entire unit. Like everyone else, like you walk into the barracks and it's like a bunch of Pepe swinging from the chandelier, and they're like, "All right, this is the nicest guy in the
shock
group,
trooper." Yeah,
and like the rest of us are all just a bunch of dumb normies. But G Money is actually the forced PSYOP group guy. That's how
I sent. I sent in the Badlands. We have a Badlands Telegram chat, and a day or two ago, I had sent this picture of my wolf dog in there that everybody thought was cute, and G Money comes in and goes, "Seems domesticated."
He's like the personification of 4chan.
The most like his first concern was like that wolf-looking dog seems to be domesticated. Anyway, no invasions of the wolf tonight. That was absolute chaos on Wednesday night when he burst through the office door. All right, guys. Merry Christmas to you, and I guess that's it. I guess this is the longest outro ever. We will outro with the intro.
Merry
Peace
Christmas.
out. See you soon. Stop being a disappointment. Oh, I should do my tagline thing because it helps to close the loop in people's minds. This is a narrative device. I am narrative seeding right now. Remember, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Malone?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through. It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope! We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened. So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all. You fool brave me. Captain Honor, I I do not know what strength is like that. I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people fail. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.